Good morning and welcome to the Extended Day Ahead Market Forum. I'm Christina Osborne from the ISO Stakeholder Engagement Group, and I will be supporting today's event. The event materials, including the agenda and speaker bios, are available on the EDAM Forum webpage. There is a link to the forum webpage right on the front of the CAISO.com homepage. This event is being recorded and the video file will be posted on the forum webpage shortly after the event. The format of this forum primarily involves discussions among panelists. As a result, the phone lines for all participants will be muted and chat disabled throughout the event. However, we will have some time for a short Q&A session at the end of the second panel. And now I would like to turn it over to Joanne Serena, Vice President of Stakeholder Engagement and Customer Experience here at the California ISO. Joanne will take it from here with a review of the agenda. Joanne?
Thanks, Christina, and good morning, everyone, and welcome. Thank you for joining today's virtual event. I know that I am personally looking forward to when we can host stakeholder events and meetings on site again at the ISO, as I'm sure many of you are as well. That being said, we really appreciate the level of interest in today's forum and look forward to bringing you the EDAM Forum today. We will kick off the forum with opening remarks from the ISO's President and CEO, Elliot Mainzer. Elliot will provide some background and context around what brings us together today, and will then host a CEO roundtable where we will hear various perspectives from utility executives across the West on the potential benefits and value proposition of an extended day-ahead market. This will be followed by a discussion on the common design principles of the EDAM framework. And then after a brief break, we will hear from a set of regulators and policy experts from across the region who will discuss the EDAM design principles and the governance changes that may be necessary. We will wrap up the forum with a look at the approach the ISO will be taking as the EDAM initiative formally gets underway. We'll go over some key next steps and some important aspects of stakeholder engagement. And now for opening remarks, it is my pleasure to introduce to you the ISO's President and CEO, Elliot Mainzer. Elliot?
Thank you, Joanne, and thank you all for joining us this morning. I think we have over 400 participants online this morning from many corners of the Western and national energy communities, and it's just great to be with all of you. I'd also like to extend a special thanks to all of our panelists and to the team of folks who helped bring us together virtually this morning. I think, as you all know, this is an extraordinarily dynamic, challenging, and exciting time in the West. Everyone seems to be talking about and working with a sense of real urgency towards greater regional coordination and market integration. Between the work of the Northwest Power Pool and our colleagues at SPP to state and federal policymakers, the environmental and IPP communities, and the recently announced Western Markets Exploration Group, I have never seen or felt a greater sense of interest and urgency on this topic. The establishment of the Western EIM by PacifiCorp and the CAISO in 2014 and its growth and expansion over the past 7 years has demonstrated the significant value of a 5-minute real-time market across the West. With $1.4 billion in cumulative gross benefits and a market footprint that by 2023 will cover all 11 Western states and 84% of load in the WECC, the growth of the EIM has provided tangible evidence that the West does best when we optimize transmission and resource diversity across the widest geographical footprint possible. And given the level of interest and desire for actionable progress towards a fully integrated market or RTO in the West, we are now prepared and excited to build on the foundation of the EIM and reinitiate our extended day-ahead market stakeholder initiative. The events of summer 2020 put a pause on previous efforts to explore EDAM and achieve alignment between the EIM entities and California IOUs on core design principles. Throughout the course of a very challenging 2021, we've kept communication channels open with our partners across the West. Earlier this spring, we brought together the California IOUs and a self-selected group of EIM entities to explore common interests and resume the conversation on core EDAM design principles. In addition to discussions at the CEO and senior executive level, a technical team met every Friday through the summer to search for greater common ground and to strengthen relationships and build trust. At the end of August, the group determined that they had made sufficient progress and obtained sufficient alignment to bring these design principles forward into a renewed EDAM stakeholder process. Today, you will hear directly from that technical group about the core design principles. You will also hear from senior executives, regulators, and policy experts on the potential benefits and value proposition of an EDAM, how it fits into the broader strategic mix of market integration and resource adequacy initiatives in the West, and the technical and governance issues we must address in the months ahead to make EDAM a viable option. In the final panel of the morning, the ISO will lay out key goals and milestones in the stakeholder process and our objective of having EDAM ready for implementation testing by the fourth quarter of 2023 and a first class of EDAM entities prepared for onboarding in early 2024. We are very motivated and committed to position EDAM as the next major step towards West-wide market integration as we all drive for greater reliability and affordability in achieving our energy policy goals. We are also clear-eyed about the challenges we must overcome together. The last year has shown us that resource inadequacy not only stresses power grids, but that it can also stress business relationships. More than ever, however, it has shown us that the solution lies in greater resource adequacy coordination and market integration, rather than further fragmentation and balkanization. This past summer also saw enhanced operational coordination between the ISO and other regional utilities, especially during the very stressed grid conditions on July 9th, when we experienced the combined impacts of high temperatures in the Southwest and wildfires in the Northwest. This operational coordination demonstrated our collective capacity to work through difficult system conditions when we're willing to look out for each other and work together to maintain reliability for all of us in the Western interconnection. The state-to-state coordination during this very difficult wildfire season and the highly collaborative work of the EIM Governance Review Committee to establish the new joint authority model for EIM governance provided additional examples of Westerners working together in new and improved ways to address shared challenges and unlock new opportunities. It is against this backdrop of renewed regional collaboration and commitment to further progress that I am now pleased to introduce the members of our CEO roundtable. So let's please bring them together on the screen. Joining us this morning, I'm pleased to introduce Stefan Bird, the President and CEO of Pacific Power, Kevin Payne, President and CEO of Southern California Edison, Deborah Smith, General Manager and CEO of Seattle City Light, Doug Cannon, President of NV Energy, Adam Richens, Senior Vice President and Chief Operating Officer at Idaho Power, and Patty Poppe, the CEO of Pacific Gas and Electric Corporation. In this panel, we're going to have perspectives and discussion on the opportunity of an extended day-ahead market and how it fits into the energy landscape of the West. Each of these panelists brings an invaluable perspective on this topic, and I really appreciate them being with us this morning, as well as the frank and open dialogue that has brought us to today. We're going to start off with some opening comments from each of the participants, and I think we'll start. Stefan, we'll go to you first. And good morning. Great to see you.
Good morning, Elliot. Can you hear me okay?
I hear you just fine. Thank
Great.
you.
So thank you all for taking time to attend this market forum. And I'll just start with, first comment on my role. So one of my roles, I oversee PacifiCorp's transmission and energy supply management functions that operates across 10 Western states. And that gives me a front row seat, to our day-to-day operations and a unique view of this fantastic Western landscape as we answer that essential question from our customers. How can we achieve a decarbonized future and do it affordably and reliably? PacifiCorp's experience over the last few years affirms my belief that this sustainable future is in fact in reach. And there are a handful of key elements that we need to execute that will make this transformative shift to a decarbonized electricity grid possible. We'll make this shift by taking advantage of the abundant resource diversity that we have in the West. We honestly have access to an almost ideal combination of some of the world's best solar, wind, hydro, and geothermal resources and emerging technologies. We'll do this by modernizing our grid to optimize our existing resources and to connect a new rich diversity of resources, serve our new electrified loads, and creating more resilience to increasingly severe weather conditions that can test our grid. And importantly, we'll do this together by partnering to make new market structures that dynamically optimize that rich diversity of clean energy to meet customer demand across the West and unlock value for all of our customers. At PacifiCorp, we're well on the road down this journey. Since 2017, we've invested over $3 billion in our energy transition. We've added over 2 gigawatts of new and repowered clean energy resources and new transmission to access it. Importantly, we did that while lowering our customers' bills. And in fact, our customer rates are lower today than they were in 2017. And our participation in the California ISO's energy imbalance market and with all of our partners has been absolutely integral to that success. We're already moving forward on our next tranche that adds another 3 gigawatts of new renewable storage and transmission by 2024. And our sense of urgency is high. There's a lot to be done, but success often breeds success. And our experience of simultaneously lowering costs and emissions gives me optimism and confidence that we're on the right track as we talk about the possibilities of the extended day-ahead market. And for us at PacifiCorp, the extended day-ahead market builds on the solid foundation of the energy imbalance market. PacifiCorp has seen tremendous value from our participation in the EIM. Our partnership with the California ISO and all the other members of the EIM has led to more than $310 million in customer savings at PacifiCorp since we launched the EIM in 2014. And simultaneously, we've realized an annual reduction of about 5 million metric tons of carbon dioxide since 2016. And while the EIM has been hugely successful, it only scratches the surface of what's possible. As we now look to the next incremental step in our market partnership with the California ISO and other participants, we see the extended day-ahead market as the next big opportunity to increase customer benefits by optimizing even larger volume of energy transactions and fuel commitment decisions that occur in the day ahead of real-time operations. Immediately in front of us is more work to do to finalize this new market's design and address questions around issues such as governance and emissions accounting. In the same spirit of engagement that successfully evolved at EIM, I'm confident that these questions will be answered and that those who are willing to commit to making the extended day-ahead market work will succeed. And while we lean into the extended day-ahead market as an important next step, PacifiCorp will also continue to tirelessly explore all market tools and opportunities available to us to ensure that we can carry out our fundamental mission to serve our customers reliably, affordably, and with increasingly cleaner electricity. And to that end, we continue to engage our neighbors across the West who also see the value in forging partnerships to improve our combined capabilities and increase efficiencies as we lead through this extraordinary time in our sector's history. And that's why we're contributing to the important work also happening now in the Northwest Power Pool to establish the Western Resource Adequacy Program. The latest phase of that program was just announced on October 4th, and we fully support the creation of a common resource adequacy planning standard and see that work evolve to ensure that we have greater transparency and accountability in providing the necessary power supplies to our customers. And that's also why we are participating alongside almost a dozen of our utility colleagues across the region to explore future market structures and what benefits they might bring. The momentum to find pathways to operate our systems more efficiently and find value for our customers has never been stronger. And PacifiCorp will continue to collaborate with our neighbors and explore all the possibilities. Today, however, the extended day-ahead market offers one of the most immediate opportunities to leverage the solid foundation of the EIM, take it to the next level, and deliver greater customer benefits. I applaud the work that's been done to get us to this point, and I encourage all of us to work together to launch this next important stage of the evolving Western marketplace. And again, I just want to say how much I appreciate the engagement and the participation of this coalition. We all have a stake in making the extended day-ahead market a success. The California investor-owned utilities, the California ISO, and all of our peers across the West. I just want you to know that PacifiCorp is committed to getting this important work done. Thank you.
Thank you, Stefan. Really appreciate your comments. Really helpful. Kevin, I'll turn to you next. Good morning. Great to see you.
Great. Thanks, Elliot. Thanks, Stefan. Good morning, everybody, and thanks for the opportunity to participate today. I regret that I was unable to, from a technology perspective, adopt that beautiful EDAM forum background. So I'm going to look like an outlier today, but I assure you I'm very much a part of this event and appreciate being here. SCE has been a strong supporter of regional markets because we see a real potential for customer benefits across all the West through greater regional cooperation and coordination. And building on the success of EIM, EDAM would help meet these goals and could be a big step forward for the region. I think we have a window of opportunity here, and SCE is committed to working with the CAISO and all the stakeholders with a real sense of urgency to realize it. With EDAM in particular, we see a clear value proposition in lowering energy costs for all participants through better asset utilization. The CAISO's market does an excellent job of utilizing assets, whether it's transmission, generation, storage, even demand response, to their full capability in an economically efficient manner. And the end result, of course, is lower cost to customers, which we all care deeply about. EIM has already demonstrated this, and it's produced close to $1.5 billion in benefits to customers throughout the region. And we expect that EDAM, with even more resources being optimized, to provide additional value on top of those EIM benefits. EDAM can also help everyone in the region with their clean energy goals. Now, I recognize that every state has different priorities and different clean energy goals, and any market framework needs to recognize and respect those priorities. But the Western region has just a great amount of diversity to leverage: load shapes, peak periods, access to resources, where the water flows, where the steam rises, where the wind blows, and when the sun rises and sets. And I know that many of us in the region have long recognized that diversity as an asset. And by working together, we can leverage that to the benefit of all of our customers collectively. EDAM represents an opportunity for the region to embrace this diversity and optimize our loads, resources, and transmission in a highly efficient manner, and again, bringing benefits to all of our customers. And EDAM can also help regional reliability. The principles for an EDAM design recognize the importance of reliability and resource efficiency, both through daily and hourly resource requirements and through before-the-month informational showings. At the same time, EDAM will need to respect current resource adequacy programs, like the one in place in California and what's being proposed in the Northwest Power Pool. We believe that EDAM will provide better visibility to what's happening throughout the region, like what resources are being relied on and by who, and will help get resources to the load when they're needed the most. Also, while EDAM may not be the final answer to regional reliability or resource adequacy, it's definitely a positive step forward that should help the entire region and expand the foundation for greater cooperation across the region. We all share the goals of responsibly evolving the grid, lowering energy costs, and improving reliability. And we see EDAM as a positive and important step towards achieving those common goals. So from my perspective, now's the time to act with urgency to try and realize the benefits that EDAM can provide. Now, I suspect this won't be easy. Really valuable things usually aren't, but especially when it comes to the more challenging issues like governance. But I think that great progress was made with the EIM joint governance model. And I think that's a foundation that we can build on as we look to further expand into the day-ahead market. So I think we have an exciting opportunity here if we commit to working hard together, tackling the tough issues, and acting with urgency. And I'll say for my team, the SCE team, we're ready to sit down with stakeholders, identify the issues, look for what solutions will help us all move forward together. So I want to thank everyone on the panel for being here, the CAISO team, and all the folks throughout the region for all the work that has gotten us to this point and made this next opportunity possible. So Elliot, thanks again for having me on the panel, and I look forward to the conversation.
Thank you, Kevin. Really appreciate your comments. Excellent. So we're going to turn to Deborah Smith at Seattle. Deb, it's great to see you. Good morning.
Good morning. It's great to see you, Elliot, and I also appreciate being on this panel with such a great group. It's hard to follow Stefan and Kevin, and I'll do my best. Although I will say, Kevin, if I didn't have the blue on, you would all be treated to a beautiful view of Seattle, downtown Seattle. So I don't know, and I'm impressed that Patty matched her outfit to the background. So there I am. So Seattle is one of the couple current EIM participants who are part of public power. So I'm here to represent the interests of public power. And in that sense, I've had the opportunity to work closely with Elliot for years, which is a blessing and gives me a bit of an advantage in the sense that there's a lot of trust. Elliot built a lot of trust in the Northwest. And he brings that to this role, and I think he brings that to this stepwise approach that we're discussing today. The city of Seattle has really aggressive carbon reduction goals. And for me, markets have a lot to do with our ability to continue to integrate renewables into our resource mix and to do so in a way that's efficient, reliable, and ultimately helpful for customers. not only does Seattle have aggressive goals, but many of our customers in Techland have the same. Anybody watch the hockey game last night? The Seattle Kraken had their first game. They got beat by Las Vegas. I'm sorry about that. But what's cool is that the Climate Pledge Arena, which is will be the home arena for this latest NHL franchise team, is actually the first carbon zero arena in the world. And that's the land and the place where we live. So we live amongst Amazon, Microsoft entities, tech entities primarily, who really have solid commitments to sustainability and an interest in not only greening their load, but in adding the additivity concept. And so for us, market evolution is a key part of how we will continue to serve those customers' very specific needs. It's also an exciting opportunity to collaborate. And as a Northwest utility, I really agree with Kevin's comments. If we look broadly across the West, we have diversity of resource, diversity of customer base. And if we take advantage of that, we all benefit. I see EDAM as the next best step along the way. We were and are an EIM entity, and I always like to say that we actually went live on April 1, 2020. So right at the start of the pandemic, we had a fantastic experience working with all the folks at the CAISO, and we appreciated their direction and their support for us to move forward despite the uncertainty of the time. And that decision has served us incredibly well. We are also really involved in the resource adequacy efforts in the Northwest and believe that resource adequacy is a critical part of market design. In the end, if we don't have adequate resources, market design can actually be problematic and can exacerbate the lack of resource. So for us, as we see, and as Stefan talked about, moving into phase 3A, I believe it is, on the power pool, the RAP, we are ready and all in looking at the next step, which would be EDAM. We don't see those as mutually exclusive, but we see them instead as tremendous partners and very complementary. The last thing I want to just say and stress is that, I am personally, not speaking for Seattle, but I am personally all in on markets. I was a finance major long ago, and so I believe strongly in the value of organized markets and the benefits that it will bring to us as a region. I do think that for the ISO to really develop into a true West-wide market will require continued changes in the governance model. As a Northwesterner, we love California. I love California, but I really hope that the momentum that we've got going right now will cause folks in California to think about the value of really beginning to evolve CAISO into a West-wide RTO. So with that, I appreciate being here, and I look forward to the day and learning more details from other panels. So thank you very much.
Thank you so much, Deborah. I always appreciate your thoughts, your partnerships. Really, really meaningful. Thank you very much. Okay, we're going to turn next to Doug Cannon at NV Energy. Doug, great to see you this morning.
Hey, thanks, Elliot. It's good to be here. Appreciate the invitation. Deborah, sorry to have delivered the Krakens your first loss, but I did have to cheer for the Golden Knights last night. But congratulations on having an NHL hockey team. It's a lot of fun. As the last expansion city, you'll love it. But excited to be here with the panel today and talk about these really critical issues across the West. I do want to thank Elliot for the invitation to be here and the other panelists and the opportunity that we have to share a few thoughts with you today. NV Energy was the second balancing authority area to join the energy imbalance market, and we commenced operations back in December of 2015. Since that time, EIM has clearly been a benefit for our customers in our region here in Nevada. It's demonstrated the benefits of a centrally optimized dispatch over a large geographic region, including multiple resources and, multiple utilities and the resources all of those utilities bring to bear. As shown in the California ISO's quarterly benefit report, in the last 5.5 years that NV Energy has been a participant, our customers have benefited to the tune of $133 million. That's tremendous for our customers. We've also seen environmental benefits associated with our EIM participation. through the displacement of greenhouse gas emissions and a reduction of total emissions. We've also seen a reduced measure of curtailments on our system and surrounding systems. Importantly, EIM has also enhanced reliability through utilizing available supply as well as optimizing transmission to meet real-time needs. And that has really been tremendously important, as Elliot mentioned, since 2020, when we have seen real challenges, in particular meeting summer peak loads across the West, and that combination between California and the desert Southwest and the challenges that we've had. These benefits that I just articulated really do justify the exploration of an expanded day-ahead market and the potential to capture additional savings for our customers through better optimization of regional resources on a day-ahead basis. Now, while the effort to join EIM was extensive, it took a lot of work, multiple departments, certainly at our company, and I know many others. The hope and expectation, at least for NV Energy, is that we can take much of that groundwork that was already done, that we can leverage the modeling, we can leverage the systems that were there to reduce time and cost of participating in an EDAM model as we go forward. I think there can be some real benefits there for all of us. In addition, I think, at least from our perspective, another important component of the day-ahead market is the flexibility that the day-ahead market can offer, similar to what EIM has offered. Thus, participation can be based on capturing savings on an interim basis without limiting consideration of other market opportunities that might come up. That flexibility is, I think, important for utilities across the West. Now, toward that end and to advance the day-ahead market, NV Energy has been engaged in the process that Elliot articulated. We've been engaged with the California ISO and other stakeholders to put together these principles and design concepts that have now been published and are out there. And we recognize that this is just a beginning framework, I think, as Kevin articulated. And the real work, the real lift is what lies ahead. But NV Energy certainly is committed to being part of that lift, to being a part of that engagement process and seeing what the benefits are that EDAM can ultimately deliver. And we do think that it should be pursued with a real sense of urgency so that we can find out what the benefits look like. Now, I do want to say my presence here today, being on this panel, does not indicate or doesn't show an absolute commitment that NV Energy will participate in a day-ahead market. NV Energy is going to have to, like all of my colleagues here, will ultimately have to assess what that final design looks like, what the costs and the benefits look like for our customers. And does the day-ahead market advance the policy objectives of the state of Nevada? And ultimately, do we achieve the approval of the Public Utilities Commission of Nevada? All necessary steps for us to ultimately participate in that day-ahead market. That said, certainly NV Energy looks toward the future and sees a role of organized markets in that future. Organized markets in the West, it's a dynamic topic and a dynamic environment right now. There are multiple ongoing efforts. In NV Energy, we recently announced our participation and support for the Western Market Exploratory Group. We also think that group presents some unique opportunities and are having those conversations to see what those opportunities could look like. While it would certainly be easier on our staff, and I hear this from my folks all the time, hey, why can't we focus on just one effort? That's not the reality of the situation. The reality is that the situation is, at least for our customers, we have to look at a broad range of available options and what the benefits of each of those options look like to ultimately make a decision. Now, for Nevada, there is an increased sense of urgency of having to drive to a decision because of legislation that was passed this past year that directs NV Energy to join a market by 2030 or to be participating in a market by 2030. So certainly something we'll be pursuing. Now, for Nevada, we must ultimately identify a solution that delivers value to our customers, provides Nevada an opportunity to have an ongoing voice in market operations, design, and infrastructure development, and the market must allow Nevada to advance its sustainability and system reliability objectives. Now, in order to combat climate change, mitigate the extreme weather events the West has experienced in recent years, and to also decarbonize and advance decarbonization the way we all want to across the West, it is imperative that we have an organized market across the West, that we do utilize the resources across the West to meet our collective customer needs. And I think there are real opportunities there and real benefits that can come to each of us. Now, regionalization is not a decision that can be made by one utility or can even candidly be driven by one utility. It really is something that a collective group of stakeholders are going to have to come together across the West, come to a common understanding, and then collectively advance the best interests of our customers in a collaborative way. And so I appreciate this group. I appreciate the conversation that's happening today because I do believe it advances that collaboration and helps us move forward our collective goals. So thanks, Elliot, again for the invitation.
Yeah, thank you, Doug. Really appreciate it. Always appreciate the frank conversation with you, and thanks for participating this morning. All right, we'll turn next to Adam Richens at Idaho Power. Adam, great to see you.
Hey, thanks, Elliot. Thanks. Good morning. I feel like Deborah and Doug were rubbing it in a little bit with their NHL talk. Here in Idaho, we have the Idaho Steelheads, and I will say they're a good team, but they're a long ways away from the NHL. But appreciate the opportunity to chat with everyone today. It's a pleasure. I guess I'll start by saying that, Idaho Power is not the size of, SCE and PAC and others on the panel. We bring more of a small mid-cap perspective to the conversation with our 4 gigawatts of peak. But our perspective, just hearing the other panelists, it sounds like it's very similar, and that's that the time is right to take the next step and explore EDAM in greater detail. And in my mind, we're really going to be focused on 3 items as part of that exploration. The first one, it's a bit obvious. We've all talked about it a little bit, but it really is ensuring that there's plenty of value for our customers. And we have some, good things going on for us at Idaho Power. We have a large hydro footprint that provides, dispatchable clean energy when the sun isn't shining, the wind isn't blowing. It's essentially, a large flexible battery. So it's an extremely valuable resource. We also have thousands of miles of transmission lines that really are at the core of the Western grid. We are very bullish on transmission as a major solution to decarbonization, and we're building more of it with B2H and Gateway West with our partners, PAC and BPA. So our main focus is making sure these 2 assets are properly valued in any day-ahead market. And I will say, so far, I think it looks very promising with EDAM. Elliot mentioned this. We've been able to agree to several high-level concepts with several EIM entities. And based on our preliminary work, it appears that EDAM may optimize our system in a way that will help us build less over time. And really, that's the ultimate goal, I think, for a lot of us. But we have a lot of work to do and a lot of work to do to quantify that value. And I'll talk about that in a second in my third point. But I'll say our second focus is on really taking an iterative approach to markets. Deborah referred to it as the market evolution, and we agree. We don't believe it's best to boil the ocean as it relates to developing an RTO-like market. We prefer much more of a step approach, and it's been pretty simple in our mind. We know the EIM has brought significant benefits to our customers. Like everybody on the panel, it's to the tune of millions of dollars each year. We've checked that box, and we feel really good about it. The next step has always been to dive into the day-ahead market and to quantify those benefits. Now, if that's successful, then we'll consider moving to, larger BA consolidation or RTO market evolution. But one of my favorite sayings, and my team probably gets tired of hearing it, is you eat an elephant one bite at a time. And I think that saying certainly applies as it relates to, markets. I guess the last thing, the third thing I'll say, and this has been reiterated by everybody on the panel, our belief in this area is we need to get moving because the devil is absolutely in the details, especially when you get as technical as these markets are. It's great to talk about the high level theoretical benefits. We've certainly done that for a while, but we do believe it's time to take the next step. It's time to start putting pen to paper, really in evaluating those technical details. And it's time to start moving with some urgency on the tough topics. We all know what they are. Their governance, congestion revenues, resource sufficiency, GHG cost accounting. that's when we're going to find out in the details of that whether this is going to work out. So in closing, I guess I would just say that we're excited. We're excited to dive deeper, and we really look forward to working with everybody to start, I guess, biting away at the elephant, one step at a time. So thanks for the opportunity, Elliot. Look forward to further discussion here coming up.
Thanks, Adam. Really appreciate your perspective. Okay, Patty, we've been looking forward to your comments. Patty Poppy from PG&E. Great to see you. Good morning.
Good morning, Elliot. And hey, since we're talking sports, Kevin and I have our head-to-head tonight. Game 5, go Giants. Got to get that in there. I'm a new Giants fan. Thank you, Elliot, truly, for your leadership, for convening this discussion, and your tenacity. I do sometimes wonder who has the harder job, you or me. But I know we're both going to succeed. As a newcomer to the region and to California, one thing I can say for sure is that we all need to do everything we can to heal our planet faster. Our collective decarbonization ambitions require actually real action to achieve them. Setting a goal is one thing. Doing something about it is sometimes the hard part. Often it's. Climate change is not theoretical for the people of PG&E and the people of California, for that matter. We're living it every day. And climate change is destroying our beloved places, making us feel vulnerable in the places where we should feel the safest, in our homes and in our communities. As a leader of an energy company, I feel compelled, and it's a big part of the reason why I came to PG&E, is to do all we can to accelerate and enable this clean energy and economy-wide decarbonization ambition and effort. A coordinated, enhanced day-ahead market is one step forward. It is the next bite in the elephant to enable a safer and a healthier planet for everyone. And PG&E is very enthusiastic about the potential economic and reliability benefits that can be accessed via an extended day-ahead market. So, I do sometimes hear, and I reject the notion that a cleaner energy system is inherently less reliable. I reject that notion. That may be true today because of the way our system is designed today, but it's only true because we haven't innovated away that problem. And I believe that a cleaner energy system is exactly what we need to ensure safe and resilient energy access for all, if it's done in the right way. And so leveraging the diversity that both Kevin and Deborah talked about this morning, we can do it the right way. We can do it, but we have to do it together. Really, to achieve the climate goals of California and all the Western states and reliably deliver energy, a robust energy market with an optimized system of transmission and generation is very important. I'm an industrial engineer, and I have long been a believer that an optimized system is better than a sub-optimized one. An obvious statement, but sometimes it's very hard to do. And as Doug described and quantified, optimization does work. EIM has shown us that. EDAM can enable the West to further optimize, and that would be in the best interest of all of the people that we serve. And following on the success of EIM, the extended day-ahead market is just another positive development toward our enhanced regional cooperation and coordination across the West. Our rapidly evolving energy grid is changing how safe, reliable energy is delivered, and EDAM represents another tool to address these changes. It's not the only tool, it's not the only answer, but it's a good step and it's a good answer, and we believe that at PG&E. The extended day-ahead market has certainly, as others have described, open questions that need to be answered. But with a healthy dialogue and trust and a willingness to work towards shared goals, we can reach those answers. Obviously, governance is a hot topic. The recently approved EIM shared governance developed by the Governance Review Committee shows a willingness to work together, and that's a possible path forward for EDAM governance. Effective market design, very essential. We can create appropriate incentives with an accessible, transparent, extended day-ahead market. And then finally, regional coordination, cooperation, as everyone has described, is really important. And partnering with policymakers and state leaders to map a course for success will be, where the devil's in those details. We're going to have to work through that together. But I always believe that in granting trust and in knowing that collectively we are better together, and the people that each of us are privileged to serve are better when all of us can work in an optimized collective way. Really, PG&E is supportive of reopening the EDAM stakeholder process, and we certainly look forward to working cooperatively, and we'll be dedicating resources to uncover EDAM's potential for the West. So thanks again for having me here, and it's a privilege to be with all the panelists. Thank you, Elliot. Back to you.
Thank you, Patty. Well, I agree. It's a privilege to work with such great folks. I really appreciate all your perspectives, and I think what's been so important just these last several months with new people and new roles and sort of a reinvigorated conversation is just willing to have the frank, honest conversations. These are important opportunities in front of us. It's going to take continued dialogue, continued willingness to confront the tough issues, find solutions for them, and just continue to make progress together. So I really appreciate the sentiment of all of your comments. In many ways, I think, all of the major themes have been touched upon this morning, but I did want to maybe explore a couple of questions and touch on a couple other issues. I know, Stefan, for you, I think we've heard this morning, I think most of us would agree that the establishment of the EIM back in 2014 really was one of the more pivotal events in the evolution of the Western energy market. And I think, and you've been there really since the very beginning. And I was just wanted to see if you could maybe talk a little bit more about, since we're very focused on making progress with that real sense of urgency, really moving forward, and what are some of the lessons learned from the establishment and the growth of the EIM that can actually be leveraged in the design and implementation of EDAM? How do we really build on that experience? Can you talk a little bit more about that? I'm going to get you off mute. I think, Stefan, you're on mute, so let's unmute Stefan, please.
Always. Yeah, there we go. Thank you. Yep. First, before I answer that, three thoughts come to mind, but I just got to say, the opportunity to engage with the folks that are on this panel today and others that aren't on has just been a real joy, and what could be more fun while we're tackling one of society's greatest challenges and have the opportunity to really make a difference. So I'm just thrilled to be part of this team. But three comments I would make. It is fun to look back at the EIM and how it started. I think it does provide some lessons as we think about where we're at today and our opportunity to really take this up another big notch. The first lesson that I think I'd highlight is we need to be willing to take some limited risks and provide some space to make a market. The EIM's been a huge success, but certainly recall those first few months were not without bumps. We learned how the systems worked and fine-tuned how we optimized our dispatch. Certainly every party that joined from that point forward was a lot smoother, and the benefits exploded, grew sharply as we increased the diversity and transfer capability that was available to the market. So I think a key learnings, we got to be willing to learn and adapt. We've got to be clear with our stakeholders that these efforts are a process and will evolve and be refined as we go. But we want to do our best to have a great success right out of the gate. And I'd say another lessons around governance, obviously ongoing topic. But thinking back again to the EIM when we joined in 2014, there wasn't a new governance model to go along with this new partnership with the California ISO. But it worked for us because this is a voluntary market, and we were able to evaluate the value proposition against our ability to lead if it didn't work out. And as the EIM's evolved and grown with more participants, the governance has also evolved. As Patty highlighted, I think that an important step forward with the shared authority model that's now in place. So through a lot of hard work, compromise, we've got a new governance model that's emerged that fairly represents the interests of all participants, and I think that experience helps carve a path forward for EDAM, which is similarly a voluntary market. Third lesson I finish on is when it comes to markets, we've got to prove concepts and demonstrate value to our customers, obviously, to maintain credibility with our regulators and stakeholders along the way. And that means we need to approach this work incrementally, as Adam and others talked about, and transparently. Going simply further and faster can end up becoming a lot slower ultimately if we don't bring people along and build trust with what we're doing that provides that tangible benefit. We're able to do that with EIM, and that's why I've got confidence and certainly will focus on that's what we need to do here to expand on the EDAM. So thanks for the question.
Yeah, thanks, Stefan. I want to go a little bit further into the governance question. Kevin, I want to turn to you. Edison was incredibly constructive and helpful in the process of getting us to the joint authority decision. I think your team really engaged, very clear. And governance has really always been an important element in the development of regional coordination mechanisms. So as I think we all know, but just to make sure everybody knows that back in August of 2021, the ISO Board of Governors and the EIM governing body both voted unanimously to approve the new joint authority model for EIM governance. And so to what extent do you think that joint authority model can be leveraged to provide governance for EDAMs? So Kevin, maybe talk a little bit about that, and your take on that would be helpful.
Yeah, thanks for the question, Elliot. Despite all the complexities of these markets and, governance always seems to prove to be the thorniest issue. But what I think is really significant is that the region worked together over a period of about 2 years to evolve EIM governance to where it is today, which is a joint authority model. So, and not only did that have unanimous support at the CAISO board and the EIM governing body, but it really has broad support throughout the region. So I think that was a positive development that really demonstrated something very important, that we can solve difficult issues like governance and the many other complexities as well if we all work together and try to leverage the benefits that all of us have talked about on the panel today. So as we look to expand the scope into the day-ahead market, I think the EIM governance model should be a great foundation to build on. And since we already have a broadly supported governance framework, I'm hopeful that we can work within that joint authority model with EDAM. But I think that's going to be an important thing to test early in the stakeholder process and to hear from all the parties about what they think will be needed in order to make this work. And I think it's going to be paramount to get the challenging design and governance issues on the table quickly, so that we can try to find the feasible solutions that'll support broad participation in an expanded market. Because if we don't get broad participation, we don't leverage the benefits. So I do think we have a strong foundation to build on, and I'm optimistic that we can find those solutions if we work together with urgency and stay committed to the process. So those are my thoughts, Elliot. I think we have a lot to leverage here and to grow from.
Yeah, I mean, I know we could all speak at length on this topic. I think there's certainly all of us recognize how important it is, and something that we're going to be taking on, right at the beginning of this conversation. And so I know some of the conversations we've all had at the CEO level have been very pointed and very, I think, frank about that issue. And I just really appreciate the fact that everybody recognizes that we need to get moving on that. We have a great foundation. I think the success of this summer, I think, really opened up new frontiers of opportunity in that conversation. So really appreciate that. I wanted to just turn to Deborah for a moment. Because, Deb, Seattle was the first public power utility in the Northwest to join the EIM, and you're now deeply engaged in the development of the Northwest Power Pool's Western Resource Adequacy Program, something that I've been very encouraged to see developing. I think it's wonderful to see that kind of cooperation. So can you talk a little bit more? I know this summer was interesting from an operational perspective and other aspects. Can you talk just a little bit more about the synergies that you see between the RAP and EDAM, and how do you view the potential to co-optimize those two, I think, very important efforts?
Yeah, thanks, Elliot. And I do have to give a quick shout out to Frank Avangi from the Northwest Power Pool, who has really been just a force of nature moving things forward in only his way. He has an amazing way of leading, I would say. And so it's been fantastic. Also, I noted in your opening comments, Elliot, you said that resource adequacy stresses our system, it stresses business relationships, and I want to go on record as saying resource adequacy stresses CEOs and all of our staff. So it is probably the thing that I worry about, that we all worry about most in the Northwest. Seattle is over the course of the year, we are a naturally long utility, and we are fortunate to have a great hydro fleet where we are able to serve almost 60% on an annual basis of our own load with our own generation. But I think I would share a story which I think illustrates how both the EIM and then of course the EDAM would provide even more opportunities, but how resource adequacy and a market approach, how they complement each other. You talked about, was it July 9th, but for the Northwest, it was June 29th and 30th, where we experienced incredibly high temperatures. I think Maria Pope from PGE was saying last week that it was 115 in Portland, and it wasn't quite that hot in Seattle, but it was, we broke all of the records. And Portland and Seattle are the large cities that have the lowest air conditioning. So, we are talking about, and we had significant loss of life in the region on those days. And I know that Stefan and others dealt with that issue at the same time. But what was true for us was we were able to keep the lights on and the fans blowing. And the way we were able to do that during those 2 days was by leaning into the EIM and transferring in a substantial amount of power, and by participating in the Northwest Power Pool's pilot resource adequacy program. So it was those two tools together that allowed Seattle to, weather that storm. And so for me, when I think ahead, again, and I talked earlier about for Seattle, much of the value proposition that I see both in the EIM and the expanding EDAM is the opportunity to continue to integrate renewables, which is really important to us in the Northwest, especially when we think about climate change and the potential impacts over the long term on our hydro fleets. So I am always looking for ways that I can increase baseload resource, but also maintain flexibility. And I think as we look at, I think this year we talked about this, Elliot, you and I think that we've heard that, this is one of the lowest hydro years that we've had. We are seeing less output from our legacy projects. So markets are going to be an important and a growingly important tool to help us weather that change. And so for me, I look to the EDAM, and I want to say also, because I think Doug said this, when I came to Seattle, the decision to participate in the EIM had already been made. And there was some leftover heartburn about how that decision was made internally. I think everyone today recognizes and is appreciative of the value that has been part of our participation. So I think folks are over that. But I committed very early on that we would have a more robust process before we took that next step. And so right now what we're doing is we see ourselves, and we are incredibly fortunate and feel very privileged to be part of the group that is helping to shape what an EDAM would look like. We will still have our own decision-making process to determine whether the EDAM is the next best step for Seattle. But we know that resource adequacy is, and we know and we believe that resource adequacy on a stepwise approach followed by expanded, enhanced markets is part of our future.
Well, thank you, Deborah. And, certainly having lived through resource inadequacy, it certainly which is very much stresses grids and potentially business related. We know resource adequacy is so foundational. So I really appreciate the way you're seeing both of those lenses and the potential of those things to come together. I think it's really critical for us. So I've appreciated the collaboration with the whole team of folks at the Power Pool who are really pushing that. It's already creating great opportunities for harmonization and conversations with California. So very important. Adam and Doug, I had a follow-up question for you, but I think you both touched on the elements that I was going to poke on a little bit more in your initial comments. So I think maybe what I'll do is I'll turn as we get ready to close back to Patty. Patty, you are one of the newer members of the Western energy community, but you do have a lot of experience with markets and regional coordination from your time in the Midwest. I was wondering if there just just to close us out, are there any other lessons from your previous leadership role that you think are most applicable to this very important moment in the West?
Yeah, Elliot, thank you. And I'll be brief because I know we're wrapping up here, but our success with MISO in the Midwest was very quantifiable, very real. It wasn't perfect, like no market is perfect, but our day ahead market provided coordination and transparency and a collaborative framework. It leveraged that geographic diversity and the weather patterns that Kevin talked about. We have that massive opportunity here in the West to do the same, but to deliver lower cost energy that was both reliable and a market that was very transparent. We did not have daily squabbles or questions or shenanigans. It was very clear. Everyone understood the rules, and the rules may not have been perfect, but we knew what they were, and we could plan and we could invest accordingly. And as a result, our customers saved money every year because we could have the most economic dispatch daily. And I just think there's something really, a great potential for EDM to do the same. So I really look forward to taking the next step forward.
Thank you, Patty. And, thank you to all of you. I mean, unfortunately, we are out of time. There's so much to explore. I really appreciate all your comments. I really appreciate the very engaged and constructive, thoughtful conversation. And mostly, I just really appreciate the partnership. You guys are just fabulous to work with. Your teams have been absolutely incredible. Just watching that group work together across the summer, we're going to hear from them next. It was really inspiring to see them sitting down and working across tough issues. So I think we're really moving in the right direction. And thanks again to all of you for being here this morning. And so on that note, I'm going to pass the microphone now over to Mark Rothleader, the ISO's Senior Vice President and Chief Operating Officer, who's going to be introducing the members of the technical team who worked on the EDAM core design principles these past few months. And again, I really appreciate all of you being here today. You guys really, I think, established the real template for working through challenging issues in a truly collaborative and trust-building manner, and I appreciate it. So, Mark, I'm going to pass it over to you and looking forward to the conversation.
Thank you, Elliot, and good morning. I just have to say, wow, that was a really inspiring set of region-wide opening comments. And it's a great transition to the discussion that the individuals that I'll introduce now have been working on in developing kind of the EDAM framework for a successful next step in developing detailed design. So let me introduce the panelists as we transition. We've got Kathy Anderson, Senior Manager, Real-Time Operations and Markets from Idaho Power. Jim Baggs, from the Oversight Services Officer for Market Design Strategy from Seattle City Light. Alan Meck, Senior Market Policy Advisor from San Diego Gas and Electric. Jeff Nelson, Director, FERC Rates and Market Integration from Southern California Edison. Bobby Olson, Director, Supply and Trading from Salt River Project. Scott Renzel, Director, Portfolio Management from Pacific Gas and Electric. David Rubin, FERC Energy Policy Director from NV Energy. Kevin Smith, representing the balancing area in Northern California. And Mike Wilding, Vice President, Energy Supply Management from Pacific Corp. Well, for the past few months, this group and a few others convened for an hour every Friday to discuss and debate key EDAM market design areas. I'm very encouraged by the collaborative work of this group in such a short period of time. While there were differences of opinion and perspective expressed, there was really clear openness to listen and resolve any differences. What really encouraged me was that through the discussion, we discovered together that there was actually more alignment than any misalignment. While not representing all entities, this group represented a good cross-section of the EIM community interested in EDAM. Topics were selected and prioritized by the group, focusing on those issues that were expected to be the most challenging to develop in detailed design. While we understand the design will evolve, this work is important to launching the detailed design work with a sense of common purpose and momentum. With that, the panel is prepared to discuss the results of 7 EDAM design areas. The first area that I'm going to hand off to Kevin Smith and Scott Renzel to discuss is the importance of and it was really important in the early discussion to get a clear understanding how the voluntary participation model was so important for EIM success also provides a level of confidence in commitment in a day-ahead market forum. With this, I will hand it off to Kevin and Scott to discuss this key design element.
Thanks, Mark. Hopefully you can hear me okay. Before I start, I just wanted to introduce BANC a little bit because not everybody knows who the Balancing Authority of Northern California is. It is a joint powers agency under California law. Modesto Irrigation District, City of Redding, City of Roseville, SMUD, City of Shasta Lake, Trinity PUD, and then the Western Area Power Administration, Sierra Nevada region resides within the BANC footprint. The California-Oregon Transmission Project, which is 1/3 of the AC intertie, is within the BANC footprint as well, as is the Transmission Agency of Northern California. BANC's a NERC registered balancing authority. It's a planning coordinator and also is an EIM entity. But before I jump into voluntary and more particularly what voluntary is not, I wanted to note just kind of where we've come from because we have a long history with the CAISO and it's not always been a good history. And so just as a reminder, so we don't lose the so-called forest through the trees, I wanted to talk a little bit just about kind of where we've come from as an organization, as a balancing authority and the steps we've made towards progress with EIM. We started with the energy crisis in 2001. Many remember that. SMUD, which is one of my clients and a member of BANC, formed a control area in 2002. In 2004 and 2005, a group of munis left CAISO and formed in the expanded control area of SMUD. And then ultimately, that led to the Balancing Authority of Northern California. But there was an MRTU war, and I think Mark and others remember this well, where we were strongly opposed, and we formed a group called the Control Area Coalition, which some of the parties now who are either in the EIM or actually actively planning to join the EIM were part of that coalition to oppose the expansion of markets. So I don't drag all this up to bring a negative spin on this, but just to show how far we've come. Because in 2013, when PAC started working towards formation of or participation in EIM, and then ultimately participating in EIM in 2014, BANC, SMUD, and others were quite opposed to the expansion of EIM. But fast forwarding to 2016, we began negotiating in EIM and have had an extremely good relationship with the CAISO. And it's been nothing but a positive. We started in 2019, and in 2021, the second half of the Balancing Authority, which included the large PMA, WAPA, we all joined, so we have one unified balancing authority in the EIM. So I just want to make that point that we've come a long way over these last, 14, 15 years. It's been, a checkered past, but we've made a great effort. This group and working group, my colleagues, it's been a great experience. I look forward to further discussions. I did want to note on the issue of voluntary, more what it is not. I think some may see voluntary as an opportunity to bounce in and out of the market. We don't see it that way. Voluntary to us is the upfront commitment to join the EIM or EDAM. It allows for ease of ingress and egress. It avoids complex arrangements and other things that would otherwise be required. It's a great incremental step forward. But when we're in, we're in. And just like EIM, We see ourselves fully participating day to day, not making daily decisions whether to be in or out. This is a full commitment to settle our loads within the EDAM market. So I don't want anyone to get an idea that the voluntary nature of this is somehow less than a full commitment by the individual EIM or EDAM participants in the market. And I know that Scott from PG&E has some other thoughts on that, so I'll just turn it over to him at this point.
Thank you. Yeah, I would certainly echo all of the comments that Mark and Kevin have made to date. The working group relationship was definitely a productive, collaborative experience. I believe that people approached it with an open, candid mindset to have a discussion and a dialogue about what can be achieved. And I think the concepts and principles that we'll talk about in brief today really start to reflect there is an opportunity here for us to move forward and really identify, and as many have mentioned, dig into the details and uncover how we can extract value from the extended day ahead market. One thing I will note is there was an extensive amount of commitment from the working team members. As Mark mentioned, every Friday, it was a lot of time we spent discussing what were challenging topics. And I want to thank and recognize and appreciate the effort of all the folks involved. So voluntary participation, much like Kevin talked about, part of it is really what it is not. Voluntary does not mean day-to-day operational choices, but rather the choice to commit to EDAM. This choice is an obligation to perform the market, to allow everybody's full load to be optimized and available in EDAM so that participants can achieve the economic and reliability benefits that we hope EDAM will deliver. EDAM participants with appropriate notification have the opportunity to exit the market after a commitment period and appropriately satisfying obligations. And that is where the voluntary opportunity really comes in for people to understand what they're getting themselves into. Joining EDAM, like many of the EIM entrants already will attest, is a substantial upfront commitment. There is work to be done not only to organize the process, but also to get into updating systems, updating processes to participate actively in the market. And I didn't get the impression that any of the EIM entities that were involved in our working group discussion took this decision lightly. And it was definitely a commitment to fully participate and try to leverage and maximize the opportunity both for themselves as well as all of the market participants in achieving what we can with EDAM. As many have mentioned, there is still detailed design to push forward on. And I think this working group put us on a place to start, to have that open dialogue, to relaunch into the stakeholder initiative and have a productive conversation forward about seeking an opportunity here for all. And with that, I will turn it back to Mark. Thank you.
Thank you, Scott, and thank you, Kevin. I think it's important to get a good understanding about the participation model and the commitment so that we could touch on and move on to other commitment discussions. And the next discussion really was around transmission commitment. How does the EDAM model ensure that there's adequate transmission provided? After addressing, like I said, the participation model, the group discussed, they identified some areas to potentially enhance how transmission is provisioned under an EDAM concept to better achieve the objective of maximizing transmission availability. It's also important that the third-party customers see that the transmission commitment model enabling their participation in an EDAM as well. With that, I'm going to turn it over to Kathy Anderson and Jeff Nelson to brief you on these common concepts associated with transmission commitment.
All right, thanks, Mark. Hopefully everyone can hear me. Transmission is very important to regional market evolution and expansion, as well as to the clean energy future that we're all driving towards. The connectivity made available to the market between the various entities is key to unlocking the benefits. The objective for EDAM transmission is to maximize the amount of transmission made available for the market optimization, while also ensuring that the OAT framework and the existing contractual arrangements are respected. We all recognize the importance of having the largest amount of transmission possible available to be optimized. And to support the objections, we continued looking at the buckets of transmission that were set out in the original stakeholder process. And these buckets represent the different sources of transmission that can be utilized in the market. The bucket 1 transmission is network and point-to-point transmission service that's used to meet load service and resource sufficiency obligations. It's transmission that's procured prior to the EDAM submittal timeframe. The transmission in this bucket that is identified as optimizable will be optimized by the market at no additional usage fee. However, some of this transmission will be associated with self-schedules that are not optimizable to the market, and the policy and market designs need to recognize under what circumstances this transmission could not be optimized to ensure that the restrictions are respected. The bucket 2 transmission is firm and conditional firm point-to-point that's been reserved by different parties but not identified as the bucket 1 transmission. This can be transmission that's owned by load-serving entities, generator operators or owners, and marketers. Transmission in bucket 2 can be scheduled by the transmission customer, provided by that customer to the EDAM market for optimization, or it could remain unscheduled by that customer. To encourage customers who would not be using their reserve capacity to make it available to the market, there should be some form of incentive. The exact form is still to be discussed, but it could consist of an allocated share of congestion payments. To further support the transmission maximization principle, there is the question as to whether it could be feasible to permit the market to optimize bucket 2 transmission that was either not scheduled or was not directly provided to the market by that customer, and still preserve their ability of that customer to use the transmission for the OAT. So basically, if the OAT customer submitted a schedule after the EDAM market run, the market would redispatch to accommodate the change. Bucket 3 transmission is that firm transmission that's not yet previously sold by the transmission provider. It's also known as firm ATC or available transmission capability. This bucket would be made available to the EDAM for optimization. However, compensation to the transmission service provider at some usage rate would be required. The rate could be a previously approved posted rate or a discounted rate at the discretion of the transmission provider. And to ensure that the transmission continues to be available for OAT usage, any bucket 3 transmission not optimized by the EDAM market would release back to that transmission service provider so they can offer it into the OAT world. So that's basically a summary kind of the different buckets that we talked about. And now I'll just turn over to Jeff for his thoughts and comments on this.
Kathy, thank you very much. Thanks to everyone that participated on this panel, and special thanks to Kathy. As being an ISO member for over 20 years, we really have drifted away from an ISO participant perspective from the world of the OAT. And it's been very helpful to really dig into how does the OAT work versus how does the ISO work. And one of the key themes or common themes is we need to respect commitments. To the extent someone has a transmission contract under, I'll call it the old world, we need to respect that. Whatever we do in our market design needs to make sure that that person is held harmless or given opportunities to do something even better. So that was a big theme, and it'll come up again in sort of the congestion rent allocation. Another thing we did try to touch on was in sort of the ideal world, in an end state, if you could imagine the best possible use of transmission, it would be effectively no incremental cost to go anywhere within the entire ISO's footprint. And you just have an open highway that any resource could get to any load depending on how the economics worked. Wonderful end state to think about, but we're a long way from that end state, and we have to be realistic. We can't get there in one step. We're not asking people as part of this design to stop selling transmission as part of their OAT. But what we are saying is let's look for as much of the transmission we have and try to get it into the EDAM so we've got as much available as possible. So just to emphasize some of the key themes on transmission, we're honoring existing commitments and still allowing people that have their transmission the ability to make third-party sales. We're not prohibiting that as part of the design. Now that is something in the ISO that ultimately, when we went to a full ISO, that was prohibited. We had to basically not sign new contracts and unwind what we had. We're not doing that as EDAM. We're honoring existing business models, but we are trying to get as much as we can into the optimization for the benefit of the market. Okay, and again, a special thanks to Kathy. She was very, very helpful to me personally as we walked through a lot of complex issues on how the oats work. To the whole team, but Kathy in particular, thank you. And Mark, with that, I'll turn it back to you.
Great, thanks a lot, Kathy, and thanks, Jeff, for those comments on transmission commitment. With the continuing development and focus and on resource adequacy across the West, there were several elements of supply commitments and the role of resource adequacy versus the role of resource efficiency that we had to also discuss. This is important as the resource adequacy programs develop and evolve across the West. With that, I'm going to turn it over to Alan Meck and Mike Wilding to discuss the results of this key market design area around supply commitment and transparency.
Hi, good morning. I apologize for my voice. I'm going to try and power through. Hopefully it holds up through the rest of the panel. Yeah, so this was a potential big sticking point for the discussions on EDAM. And originally we had tried to come up with a design that was going to be a very stringent, but what we quickly realized was that it was very important, not just for California, but also for a number of different parties around the West, to have a resource sufficiency test that respected your particular balancing authority and however it is that you do resource adequacy. Obviously, California has a very, are you kidding me right now, Kat? California has a very particular way of doing resource adequacy, and everyone else has different ways of doing resource adequacy. Okay.
It's okay, Alan. We're okay with dogs and cats. We had them during the whole session. Go ahead, Alan.
She has not paid attention to me in 3 days, and now is the first time. And so it was very important for all parties around the West to know, oh my God, to make sure that the resource sufficiency test basically counts whatever it is that you are claiming for resource sufficiency on the resource sufficiency test. Everything that goes into your resource adequacy program should map onto that. In other words, however California does resource adequacy should also count for the resource sufficiency test. And however every other individual balancing authority does it should count too. And what we didn't want to do was create a second RA framework, like a regionalized RA framework where CAISO was going to be creating a second resource adequacy framework that people had to comply with. That was going to be a very, very tough pill to swallow. And so I think that we came up with a very good conceptual framework to build upon where EDAM is going to be, and we're going to try as best we can to adhere to this, where EDAM is going to be an entity that respects how your balancing authority does resource sufficiency, while still doing what it can to ensure its own reliability. We had talked about maybe instead of having a really stringent test, we could have a 45-day advisory showing where each balancing authority can report in how it's doing in meeting its commitments. But I think that it is very good. What we've got right now is a good framework to build upon, is what I would say.
Okay, thanks for that. With that, I think we're going to Mike to fill in the picture there. And I just want to make sure it's clear. I mean, the objective here was to build some harmonization around resource adequacy, resource efficiency. And Mike, maybe you could expand on that and how we achieve that.
Yeah, great. Thank you. Appreciate it. Yeah, maybe just a couple points that I would like to make or perhaps reiterate. And like you said, Mark, the purpose of any resource sufficiency evaluation that we would have in the EDAM would be to ensure that EDAM entities have sufficient resources to serve their load. And so essentially we don't want to pass problems on to others, but want to each be sufficient, resource sufficient. And I think one major thing here, as Alan stated, was this is not meant to modify, replace, or change any state or local control of resource planning or long-term integrated resource plans or the processes that already exist there. And so we want EDAM to fit within those existing processes and local and jurisdictional controls. And then a lot of folks have mentioned already the Northwest Power Pole Western Resource Adequacy Program, and that it is entering the implementation phase and just recently announced that. One of the things that, one of the principles that we've agreed to here and that we've put in place is that the EDAM should recognize existing and emerging resource adequacy programs, including the one I just mentioned, including California's resource adequacy program, and I guess any others that come about. And it's specifically that resource sufficiency evaluation in EDAM should attempt to harmonize with those programs, with those other programs, to the maximum extent possible. And so that, a lot's already been talked about, so I won't go into there, but so that the programs and the EDAM can work together and produce a greater reliability for the region. And then maybe the last thing that I would just like to hit on and touch on is we're looking for a balance here as well. We want to be able to comply with that resource efficiency evaluation and achieve the objective of having all entities be sufficient, but not at such a cost that it would undermine the benefits of EDAM. So I think we've heard that, the devil's in the details, the real lift lies ahead. So those are all things that we'll have to work out, but that is what we will be striving for, is that balance to achieve that objective in a way that we can still also achieve those expected benefits for our customers. And so with that, Mark, I'll turn it back to you.
Great. Thank you, Mike, and thank you, Alan. As you can see here, we're at a relatively conceptual level, but there's having good agreement on things like supply commitment, transmission commitment is really important for the detailed design. And the next topic around congestion rent is a bit more of a detailed design, and we kind of went into it, and we went as far as we could, and kind of building on the theme that one of the objectives is to maximize the transmission available for optimized use. The question is how congestion rent and usage charges across the different transmission buckets that were described earlier are allocated is really a complementary element to the overall transmission provisioning and incentives. This topic is also important for California PTOs because they also they're a transmission customer and rely on transmission outside of the California footprint to bring some of their resource adequacy resources back into California. So with that in mind, David Rubin and Scott Ranzel will discuss some of the additional common perspectives around congestion rent and allocation.
Thanks, Mark. And this really sort of builds off the prior discussion about the transmission made available to the EDAM. Because a primary challenge in developing the EDAM is how to combine the physical right reservation system used by the external EIM entities, or maybe it's better to call them EDAM entities, under their open access transmission tariffs and their role as the transmission provider, with the California ISO's flow-based transmission paradigm using financial rights to hedge congestion costs. As was the case with the EIM, it will be necessary for the EDAM entity OATS to be modified to facilitate the scheduling timelines for the new day-ahead market. but we must do this in a manner that respects the settled expectations of our transmission customers, in particular, their ability to use reserve transmission capacity and to be able to make intraday scheduling adjustments without paying more than the approved access charge. To balance these interests and with the goals identified earlier to maximize the transmission available to the market and minimize any phantom congestion where the transmission capacity could go unscheduled and unused, the small group focus on that hold harmless principle as related to the EDAM entity's customers, and that would be implemented in 2 steps. First, the incremental congestion revenue from the intraday schedule changes by the customers would be allocated back to the EDAM entity as the transmission provider. And second, the EDAM entity's OAT would be amended to specify that those revenues first would be sub-allocated back to the customers incurring the congestion charge. Any residual revenue or shortfall would then be allocated across measured demand. Allocating the incremental congestion revenues through the EDAM entity provider serves several important purposes. Sort of going back to the beginnings of the EIM, it was important for certain of the Pacific Corp and NV Energy transmission customers to continue interacting only with their OAT transmission provider and not to have to become a separate scheduling coordinator under the California ISO tariff. This raises the question as to then why not have an option where some of the customers would settle intraday congestion directly with the California ISO and others would not. And the reasoning behind having all of the settlements run through the EIM entity was to minimize any potential uplifts and to assure that all of the OAT transmission customers would be treated equally. In other words, we weren't seeking to raise transmission rates or revenues or to lower transmission rates and revenues, but to keep everything as close to the same as possible as it is today. And then obviously with this proposal or any market design, this approach would not necessarily be fixed for all time, but the group believed it was a reasonable approach to the outset of the potential EDAM. And with that, let me turn it over to Scott for any thoughts from a PTO perspective.
Thank you, David. I appreciate it. I'm going to echo some of the comments that David just recalled, but with any market design, cost allocation is a critical issue, and the working group spent a good deal of time really trying to identify clear, equitable cost allocation principles and concepts, which you see reflected in the document we've produced. After coalescing around the idea of the hold harmless principle we've talked about a couple of times, the working group really started to focus in on congestion resulting from EDAM and the point at which the congestion occurs to understand the impact that it would have on the EDAM and the California ISO. It was important for many participants, including the current California participant, the CAISO participants, to ensure they were hedged appropriately for congestion and the accounting for an allocation back for respective participants, including the CAISO participants importing and exporting via EDAM, is performed transparently and equitably. The existing congestion rent processes within the ISO are expected to remain intact. So we were talking specifically about EDAM and that function. The existing processes inside the ISO will remain intact and will continue to reflect the cost and revenue procedures within the CAISO today, and will work via the processes that it currently exists. We also do not expect to share the transfer congestion rent that may occur in the EDAM transfer path feeding into the ISO. To enable the congestion rent allocation for EDAM, the CAISO will allocate, as David mentioned, the appropriate congestion to the individual entities, and via the OAT and the existing processes will sub-allocate out to the appropriate rent locations or revenue locations. And with that, I will turn it back to Mark. Thank you.
Thank you. That was a great discussion and an add-on to the transmission discussion. The group then shifted to maybe more physical notions and discussions around the confidence one should have in EDAM transfers. The disposition and confidence around EDAM transfers has profound impacts on the ultimate operational and financial value of EDAM. Unlike EIM, decisions about more consequential resource commitments are being made based on the optimization and the EDAM transfers that result. Therefore, the interplay between EDAM transfers and the confidence that they can be supported is important, both from a sending and receiving balancing authority area perspective. Bobby Olson and Jeff Nelson will expand on this topic. Thank you.
Thank you very much, Mark. And when we talk about some of the more controversial aspects that we've been looking at, it was discussed in the prior panel, kind of the resource adequacy can be maybe the second biggest thing relative to market design next to governance. And it's also recognizing that the reason why that can be an issue is because everybody's concerned about how reliability can be affected. One of the core tenets and principles within EDAM is that we're not talking at this moment in time regarding consolidation of balancing areas. And as such, every EDAM participant that joins will still have to balance that tension associated with maintaining their own regulatory reliability requirements and meeting their own lights. It's not in anybody's interest, and nobody here had any desire to kind of design and build a market that would start to cascade or pass off impacts and reliability issues to others. But we also don't want to kind of unnecessarily burden EDAM with trying to solve the West problems on a wide variety of issues. As such, we get to a concept pretty quickly that transfers from an EDAM construct need to be firm. And it's one thing to say it, but we spent a significant amount of time as a group here working through a variety of examples, spreadsheet examples, and painful argument and clarification to really try and understand whether or not we could get through a construct and design that would fundamentally support firm transfers here. And I think we reached the conclusion that you definitely can. And in part of designing that, it's important to make sure that deficiencies and shortfalls by balancing area with respect to how they work through work very similar to how it works today, in the sense that we all suffer the consequences of our own planning and resource reliability aspects. And when we look at a market design here, I think the efforts that we went through gave me very much confidence that we can get to a spot where we can design and commit to a reliable, firm transfer based on what shows up. And then as transfers or resources become unavailable, the consequences can kind of flow in accordance with kind of how they're occurring today. EDAM would still allow for access to kind of those finite resources and kind of a more efficient access to capacity, but really working around the limits, as we've seen over the last couple of years, as resources get tighter, as things change, that working around those limits continue to incentivize and motivate the appropriate behavior and action to ensure a reliable operation across an EDAM footprint that remains core to a design principle. And I think working through the examples we had, we really have a significant amount of confidence that we can get there. It does mean that there will have to be some potential limitations by balancing area and specific considerations in unique circumstances, whether it's resource or transmission pathway, and those will have to be built into the design. But there was no showstoppers with respect to having trust and reliability with respect to those, the EDAM firmness. It also helped to highlight the importance of having EDAM reliability flow all the way into the real-time market and how everything complements each other, and potential changes that may need to be facilitated associated with EIM participation as well, in order to ensure that EDAM and EIM are complementary.
Great. Thank you. I'm going to hand it off to Jeff.
Hey, thanks, Bobby. Again, in our detailed conversations, very helpful. We worked through a lot of examples, so very helpful, Bobby, for the stuff we did in our little workshops. The theme here is we've got to be able to count on these things. We can't create a market that introduces uncertainty, pulls the rug out from someone when they thought they had resources and they don't. That's just not a constructive design. So we have to honor these principles that if EDAM makes a commitment, it'll be designed to live up to those commitments. to the extent it can. I mean, sometimes there's unavoidable things you just can't do, but it'll be like firm. And we worked with numbers. It seems like it'll be a similar type of accountability balancing authorities have today when they either are importing firm or exporting firm power. We didn't see that it was going to create any additional burdens on balancing authorities different than what they do in today's transactions. One thing I do want to note that although I would hope that the entire West would be part of EDAM, even if that becomes true, it may take time to get there, and there may be people coming in at various times. So part of EDAM is going to have to recognize that, again, the old world is going to be part of it. And so keeping sort of parallels to making sure that it interfaces with the old world, and if there's a transition between an EDAM participant to a non-EDAM participant, there's understanding for everybody on what's happening and the firmness of the transactions. So that old world and new world is going to be a reality for some period of time. And this all has to work together and not create reliability issues for anyone involved in these transactions. And firmness is basically how we get there. One thing I do want to emphasize that Bobby touched on, we had some very candid discussions about, well, what does it mean to be able to guarantee that this thing is firm? And what does that mean if there's uncertainty or there's been resource adequacy commitments dedicated to a certain balancing authority? And there may be times that because of high stress or high uncertainty within a certain balancing authority, that it may not be able to support a lot of exports or any, depending on the conditions at that time. But we felt it was better to say no and mean it than to say yes and then change your mind because you really couldn't live up to that commitment. So those are details to be worked out, but it's a balance of trying to say yes to the extent you can, but making sure that reliability is maintained within each balancing authority and commitments are honored once they're made. So, Mark, I'll turn it back to you.
Great, thank you. As you can see from the discussion thus far, we did not shy away from challenging topics, and the last one was certainly one of the more challenging topics. And the next one is nearly as challenging, but for different reasons. Coordinating environmental, regulatory, and accounting for policies into the market policy has been something the ISO has done starting in 2013 when the California Cap and Trade program started. When the ISO implemented the EIM in 2014, we had to develop and continue to evolve market design solutions to account for GHG associated with EIM transfers. As we consider EDAM, we need to also factor in the fact that other states are adopting clean energy policies in the form of RPS requirements or GHG accounting. All of these need to be carefully incorporated into the ultimate EDAM market design. Mike Wilding and Scott Renzel will describe the principles around a GHG policy design overlaying the EDAM. Mike?
Yeah, thanks, Mark. Yeah, I agree with what you said there, and GHG accounting is definitely going to be, a lot of work that needs to go into that and into this principle. And the main objective here that we're trying to accomplish is to account for the GHG costs of EDAM transfers equitably and consistent with state policies for all the different participating entities. And these principles are most likely familiar with some of the folks that were involved in previous EDAM discussions prior to this summer. And they are essentially the same principles that were put forth previously by the EIM entities. And any changes that were made were not intended to change the underlying meaning of the principles, but rather to provide clarity. And this is particularly important to PacifiCorp for the GHG accounting because we provide, we have a vast, as Stefan mentioned, a vast service territory with retail customers in 6 states, spanning across the Western United States with different and varying GHG policies or absence of GHG policies. And so this is a principle and a topic that's very important to us. And I think the first 2 points really wrap up what we want to accomplish and those principles, and that is to fairly reflect and be consistent in EDAM with the state policies or the states that have GHG policies, but also for the states and jurisdictions that have not adopted a GHG policy, those states should not be improperly affected, or the customers with that reside in those territories. And then also, along those lines, the costs and benefits of any GHG policy should be borne by the entity responsible for the output of the resource, and those costs and benefits should be allocated accordingly and consistent with the existing regulation policies. And then lastly, we want to create a level playing field. And so therefore, renewables outside of a GHG jurisdiction, they should not be unfairly disadvantaged, but should be on a level playing field with renewables that are inside of a jurisdiction that has a GHG policy. And so with that, I'll kick it over to Scott to provide any further commentary on the GHG accounting.
Thank you, Mike. As we've already talked about, and I think many have heard from the CEO forum, part of the reason that EDAM looks to have benefit for many is its ability to extract across multiple resources and address some of the climate goals and carbon policies that many states, including California, have. The working group objective around GHG was really representing an opportunity to address those various state carbon policies within a single market. And there's an opportunity to do so. Today, the CAISO, as Mark mentioned, is able to address California's greenhouse gas policy and appropriately allocate costs and benefits associated with GHG resources adequately. But EDAM expansion will require a more robust solution, as Mike mentioned. The principles and concepts that have been put forward really talk about recognizing and trying to be respectful to the fullest extent possible these different yet similar in concept or result programs, and how to go about achieving that inside a single market. As we've said many times today, the devil is in the details for this, but if we're able to accomplish recognizing and respecting those and appropriately allocating the costs and benefits, as Mike had talked about, we have an opportunity here to address what is a key criteria and element of EDAM in the first place. More specifically, EDAM must accurately account for the cost and benefits of renewable and non-emitting resources. As Mike mentioned, we also want to ensure that to the greatest extent possible, leakage is minimized, and that we are able to ensure, again, to the fullest extent possible, that no resources, non-emitting or renewable resources in other jurisdictions are not disadvantaged in this process. It's important to make sure that we have full set of supply and transmission available to the market. As we've mentioned already, GHG accounting is a byproduct of that and will need to be appropriately identified, but shouldn't be a roadblock to that. And with that, I will turn it back to Mark. Thank you.
Great, thank you. Last but not least, the group did discuss price formation issues. For several years, as the resource fleet changes, FERC has explored pricing issues to help ensure that prices used for settlement were fair and reasonable, but also that they provided clear price signals reflecting system conditions. Part of the original motivation, was to incorporate uplift costs into the price, what would have otherwise been uplift costs into the price. Price formation, however, ultimately is a broader set of topics. Jim Baggs and Alan Meck will discuss this topic and how the group recommends proceeding to address these broader set of general applicable pricing topics.
Thank you, Mark. As Mark said, the topic of price formation has been something that's been discussed in regulatory proceedings for a number of years across the entire country. It's particularly important. It's not obviously the only topic of importance here, but I thought about it during the CEO panel when the notion of optimization of the market was raised, and of course, how prices are set is a key ingredient of market optimization in any marketplace, energy or otherwise. Our group had discussions about price formation, and that discussion included all the topics of reflecting true costs of energy and ancillary services, providing appropriate market price signals for generation, supply, and demand resource needs. And we discussed how to appropriately reflect the true marginal costs of production and all physical system constraints while we're ensuring that resources are compensated for their variable costs of providing service. And especially in a market with an increasingly diverse resource mix, that's a challenge for us in the West. There's some specific topics, things like uplift payments, as Mark mentioned, block loaded resources, shortage conditions, and so forth. But I won't go into those in any detail right here. We within our group discussed those topics openly and had varying perspectives on many of them. But one common theme emerged, and that was that EDAM pricing practices should result in just and reasonable and equitable price signals across the entire market, and thus be beneficial to our consumers. During our discussions, we quickly realized that these topics are not only important to the day-ahead market, but they also have significance in markets more broadly, as well as impacts even on non-participants in that market. Most of us in the West, whether EIM entities or otherwise, have been and continue to rely on bilateral transactions. That's just the way that our markets have evolved in the non-ISO framework. So a move to a day-ahead market will be a big shift. Likewise, even within California, the participants in CAISO are certainly involved in a day-ahead market today, but a move to a broad Western EDAM will substantially alter the size and scope and complexity of that world for those folks as well. And finally, the impact of day-ahead price formation practices has to be recognized as important, even beyond direct market participants. Because as you know, the prices that get developed in markets really ultimately get used in setting forward prices as well. So given the broad scope and application that extends beyond just the boundaries and the framework of EDAM, we recognized the importance to EDAM, but also are recommending that the best course of action is to consider these price formation concepts as a separate general market design initiative, either ahead of or in parallel with EDAM design work. And before anyone's tempted to portray this as just a kick the can down the road type exercise, it was very important to us as we had these conversations to note that the simultaneity or the parallel nature of this separate effort really needs to take place. It is not okay to pursue the EDAM framework and at one pace and then come back to try and deal with price formation later. These things have to happen either in parallel, or the price formation needs to be developed in sufficient time to be useful in EDAM. So I'll stop there, and then I think Alan has a few comments as well.
Yeah, thank you. That was a great. Whoa, I'm getting a big echo. Does anyone else hear that?
You're good now.
Okay. Thank you, Jim. I just want to emphasize what he left off with there, which is that we're not kicking the can down the road. We're just we recognize that price formation was potentially going to be a big sticking point and could potentially derail the process, and we didn't want to threaten the entire EDAM project with something that was not necessarily an integral part of EDAM. It was something that we could segregate out and try and deal with it separately, and that's probably better to try and give EDAM the best possible chance success. But that's not to say that we're closing the door on any of these discussions. We're open to talking about various different things, like just off the top of my head, scarcity pricing, system market power mitigation, fast start pricing. I know is a big thing that's probably on the minds of a lot of people on this call. And we're not closing the door on any of those discussions. We're open to having them. We just want to have them in a different forum so that it doesn't create an additional frustration point for trying to get EDAM through, because we recognize that we want to try and give the EDAM project the best possible chance of success. I think that's about it. I'll turn it back to Mark.
Great. Thanks, Jim and Alan. Well, I want to again thank the entire set of panelists and broader the participation of all that joined in those workshops and discussions on every Friday. The documentation that has been referred to of these common principles that's been developed by this group are actually posted and available now. As you can see from the presentations of this group, we covered a lot of ground, resulting in a good level of alignment. But it's not a detailed design, and we need to continue down the process of developing and leveraging this work for the detailed design. Again, I sincerely thank you all for your honest, open dialogue and active listening. And I'm very much encouraged that we can take this and develop a detailed set of designs in a constructive way. And with that, I think I can turn it back to Joanne, see if we have any questions.
All right, great. Thanks, Mark, and thank you to all the panelists for your participation today. A really great discussion. We have just a couple of minutes, and we'd like to take a couple of questions from the audience if we can. If you would like to submit a question to the panel, please select the Q&A icon at the top or bottom of your screen. A dialog box will pop up, and you can submit your question to us. So we have one question coming in, but I did want to first start, Mark. You know, this group has made a lot of progress over the last few months. How do you see the best way of maintaining the momentum of this collaborative work during the detailed design?
Yeah, great. And I'll maybe start it and maybe turn it over to others. But I found the working group concept, the facilitated approach that took place, as being very constructive and efficient way of understanding the issues that need to be addressed and coming to resolution. And I think I would recommend that we continue some of those stakeholder engaged workshops as a means to transition from this effort to the more detailed design as we set up to develop a straw proposal.
Great. That sounds good, Mark. There is one question, about posting materials. We do have the principles posted on our website. We'll also have a link at the end of the presentation today that shows you how to get to those resources. So those are available to you. One of the questions from the audience is really about the congestion rent allocations. So how did the group think about congestion rent allocations for the EDAM transfers? You can provide some perspective on that.
Sure. That's actually probably one of the more detailed areas we got into, and we did do some example to kind of develop our thoughts about that. I think I'll hand it off to Scott Ranzel if you could maybe describe kind of where we landed on that topic.
Sure. Let me hop off mute here. As Mark mentioned, there was a very detailed discussion. The group was able to put together a series of examples that really looked at if you were to lose a resource, what would end up happening, how you would think about that, and the appropriate cost allocation associated with any change that would happen there. One of the key criteria really is around making sure that we focus in on the congestion rent associated inside the EDAM marketplace and not extract that to everything under the idea of congestion. And that was a challenging discussion. It opened up a lot of questions for people to really get a firm understanding and figure out how to move forward. It is certainly an area that is going to require extensive work in the detailed design, as we were looking at this from a high level perspective. And I think what we got out of it was, if the principles are applied in detailed design, there's the opportunity to go through the rent allocation process and ensure that people are, again, appropriately respected, the costs are attributed and provided accurately and equitably. And that was a key consideration for the group.
Yeah, let me just add in here a little bit, because we did, the principles were applied. If the congestion was in the EDAM area, clearly that would go to, as described earlier, to the EDAM balancing area to be allocated. If it was an EDAM transfer between EDAM entities, we kind of concluded that the similar approach to EIM, where it would be generally split 50-50, unless there were special case circumstances that warranted a different look at it. As general one was 50-50 split between the two EDAM balancing areas. When it came to the California ISO transfer, where we got to was so to not disturb the existing congestion allocations, including CRRs, is if there was congestion was on the California ISO side or the intertie constraint side, it would be allocated through the ISO through the CRR process. If it was on the EDAM side, it would be allocated fully through the EDAM balancing area and their process. So that's where we got to. That's documented. Certainly there will need to be further discussion in the detail to understand that and apply that, but that's where we got to in the discussion.
All right, great. Thanks, Mark. Just one other question here I think we have time for. The previous panel, the CEO roundtable, talked a little bit about governance. I know we're going to talk about that in a future panel here after the break. But did this group discuss creating principles around governance in addition to the areas here today?
Great question. We did not. We actually tried to stay on the market design substance itself. I think we all recognized that governance has to evolve and has to be discussed, but we did not take that up. We took up the design elements, and we left that for others and other discussions to address.
Great, thanks. Yeah, we'll talk about that a little bit later. So I think that's all we have time for right now. I just did want to clarify, we obviously can't answer all the questions in a short amount of time. We are going to be scheduling a workshop. You'll hear more about that later, where we'll anticipate hearing all of your questions and being able to address them in a more timely manner and give us a little more time to address all of them. So with that, Mark, thank you very much for moderating a great panel. Thank you to all the panelists for participating. Really appreciate your discussion and dialogue today. So with that, we are going to take a quick 10-minute break. Why don't we come back at 10:40? Okay, so 10:40, we'll start back up. Thanks, everyone. All right, welcome back, everyone. I think we're ready to get started again. I just wanted to emphasize a couple things about the prior panel. We talked about taking more Q&A. We will be holding a stakeholder workshop dedicated to the EDAM principles discussion. We will be scheduling that workshop on November 12th, and that's going to be a really great workshop that will give you an opportunity for as many questions as you have. And it'll be an open forum where we'll be able to address everybody's questions in real time. So we'll be sharing some more information about that November 12th workshop a little bit later in today's program. So to bring us back after the break, our next panel, Perspectives from Around the West, features a group of very knowledgeable and engaged regulators and policy experts from across the region who will discuss the EDAM design principles and governance changes to be considered as we move into this next phase of market evolution. I'm pleased to welcome and introduce the moderator for this next panel, Therese Hampton. She is the Executive Director of the Public Generating Pool, where she represents 11 consumer-owned utilities in Oregon and Washington. She has a wealth of knowledge in the energy industry and recently chaired the EIM Governance Review Committee. We couldn't be more pleased to have Therese with us today to moderate this discussion. So Therese, turning it over to you. Thanks again for being with us today.
Great. Thank you, Joanne. I appreciate the opportunity to moderate this panel, and we get to hear some first reactions to what's been discussed this morning from this diverse group. I will introduce them, and we'll be in panel format on the screen, and I'll post some questions for the panel to respond to. So our panel today includes Tony Braun, attorney for the California Municipal Utilities Association, Spencer Gray, executive director of the Northwest and Intermountain Power Producers Coalition, Commissioner Cliff Rechtschaffen with the California Public Utilities Commission, Commissioner Letha Tawney for the Oregon Public Utilities Commission, Rebecca Wagner, consultant and former commissioner for the Public Utilities Commission of Nevada, and Commissioner Haley Williamson, chair of the Public Utilities Commission of Nevada. Welcome to all of you, and thank you for being a part of this. So we'll go ahead and jump into some questions, and we'll start with Commissioner Tawney. What aspect of the principles that were presented this morning do you find particularly interesting or important?
Good morning. First, can you hear me? Excellent. Well, thanks so much for pulling this session together, and I found this morning really fascinating, really interesting discussion. I think I'd highlight the voluntary nature that I heard, not voluntary in the sense of entities can arbitrage on a daily basis and be in and out, but in the sense that there is an opportunity for a structured exit if the situation changes. And I think that has worked well in the EIM and means that the joint authority construct, sort of the grand bargain we've arrived at so far, continues to hold and work as we lean into what this next step might look like. It really balances interests well, I think, given the scale of governance changes that are sort of in reach at the moment. I really appreciated the focus that I heard this morning from the California entities in the CEO panel in particular around supporting joint authority. That conversation really has evolved over the last year to an understanding of what joint authority could unlock for the CAISO and for regionalization more broadly. And I just want to mark what an enormous evolution that has been, and that gives me some confidence that we can continue to see where we've got common interests and find common ground. I also really appreciated hearing so much about making an efficient and effective SEAM with RA programs around the West, and the focus on respecting state policies around GHGs, whatever those happen to be, as a state with new legislation that we're working to absorb and implement and understand. I'm really looking forward to the transparency that we'll have potentially under EDAM that I'm not sure we would have otherwise. And so I'm really looking forward to understanding and seeing how that evolves. So thanks.
Great. Thanks, Commissioner Tawney. Rebecca Wagner, do you have some thoughts about kind of what was important in the principles?
Thanks, Therese. First and foremost, I wanted to quickly thank the ISO for putting together this forum and providing such a broad spectrum of perspectives to reflect on what I was a little skeptical about. Anytime I hear a subset of utilities working together and we don't know exactly what they're doing, I get it's a little hinky, but that's after a decade on a PUC. And I am so pleasantly surprised and really impressed with the work of this working group. It was a thoughtful, hardworking group that really, the main theme that I took from it was that balancing act. I'm not sure I would characterize it necessarily as old world versus new world, but more of an evolving world with some bookends that need to be respected, like state policy positions or state policies, as well as those entities within California that have already invested significantly into the infrastructure and the market. I think that the level of commitment and the varying components of commitment, both the participation model, which emulates the concept of EIM and broadens that, I think really strikes the right balance. And all of this is really demonstrates a balancing act. I think that it gives some certainty and flexibility, which is not easy to achieve at times. The transmission commitment, that explanation today was really super helpful to understand how to optimize the transmission system while still recognizing many of the utilities outside of California operate around an OAT and contractual commitments. And then obviously resource sufficiency, resource adequacy, always a challenging topic. But I felt like the way they described what they've arrived at really is striking that balance, recognizing integrated resource planning processes, harmonizing with potential resource adequacy programs, but also recognizing we have to have some certainty around the EDAM transfers. And the other piece I was happy to see is the recognition of GHG accounting. I think that this is one of those issues that it's challenging, but in order for markets to evolve beyond EDAM and into the next iteration, having a solid foundation for understanding GHG accounting, I think is critical. So hats off to the EDAM working group that pulled this together, and thank you for sharing, lifting the hood and letting us take a look.
Great, thanks, Rebecca. So already I'm hearing a theme of balance and evolution. Tony Braun, do you have some thoughts about what you thought was interesting and important in what we heard this morning?
Yes, thanks, Trace, and good morning, everybody. So my first takeaway from this morning was that people are talking to each other, and I think that's a key difference than perhaps a couple of years ago, when there really was a lot of work that was put in to lead up to the EDAM discussion, but people perhaps weren't talking across boundaries. And I think that's a really important evolution and recognition that bodes well for some potential success. The next thing that I think was a key takeaway was we are not going to solve all problems in the West through an EDAM. There's going to be differences of policies, either from region to region or from state to state. And we may all have different opinions about the good parts of those policies and the bad parts of those policies, but they need to be able to work together within some common, policy umbrella or principles. And so, if we do try to load up EDAM with trying to solve a very long list of questions that people have about how the market's going to move forward, then we will definitely have one of those old cliche, the perfect will be the enemy of the good. So I'm really pleased to see we can sort of set parameters around that and work on what we can more easily solve. And then I think my other key takeaway in having been part of the ISO startup were existing arrangements that were part of the system and they needed to be honored. And we spent years, frankly, both working on it and then litigating it. And I think that just needs to be a foundational recognition starting up this EDAM, is that there's a difference between the OAT world and the security constrained dispatch world of the CAISO, and we need to figure out a way to make them work together. We can't upset the existing and legacy agreements, and we need to find a way to operate the system and take what efficiencies we can. And so I thought that was a key takeaway, that there seems to be a broad recognition of that.
Thanks, Tony. So the substance of these proposals is important, but also the process is very important as well. And so let's transition a little bit. Commissioner Williamson, do you have any considerations or recommendations about the process going forward to further develop the EDAM market design?
Yeah, thank you so much. Thanks to CAISO for hosting this workshop. It's been so interesting so far. And one thing I think this workshop highlights for processes is the inclusivity that we need to see going forward. As we hold these stakeholder processes, as we continue talking about the market design, as we all know, devil's in the details, and having more seats at the table, more voices across all of the different energy sectors in the West, regulators, environmental groups, consumer advocates, state energy offices. It's important to hear from all of these different groups as we go forward. I think it's also really important as we work through these details that it's in as transparent a way as possible, and not just in the transparency of the data and the choices we are making, but I also think in the choices that we might not be taking, having the discussions out in the open about the details, the ideas that we are going forward with, but also things that might not work as well, and maybe some of the criticisms or concerns around those ideas. So we all know what we're talking about together. We all know what ideas are going forward and what aren't. And then just lastly on this thought, just a respect for, as I sit here as a regulator, that we do have somewhat finite resources. So just to respect those of us that are participating in these conversations, we're very excited to do so. But coming from a state that there's a lot of talk going on across the West, it's all very exciting, but we only have so many staff members that can be engaged. So to respect that we love to be at the table, but that our resources are a little bit finite in the timing of things and how we engage. But again, just the inclusivity and the transparency, I think, are key for me going forward.
Great. Thanks, Commissioner Williamson. And Spencer Gray, do you have thoughts about process, and in particular from your membership and from your experience?
Thanks, Therese, and thanks as well to the ISO for hosting this forum today. I want to applaud the ISO and the utilities who came together to relaunch this initiative. A region-wide day-ahead market would be a big step forward toward a grid that unlocks the diverse renewable development that my membership is involved with, that improves reliability and saves consumers billions of dollars. This is not necessarily a critique of the process so far over the summer and this fall, but this conversation, to echo Commissioner Williamson's points she just made, really has to pivot in a way that a broader group of stakeholders and market participants are at the table, including independent generators and marketers. These firms are full market participants. They cannot be afterthoughts in this conversation. They are building most of the new renewable projects across the West. They hold all manner of transmission rights across all the BAs. Some of them are developing transmission on their own, and many of them are deeply familiar with the regional market constructs in the East and Midwest and have that expertise and experience to offer in this conversation. In other words, they're natural allies to creating stronger regional markets, but their business models and commercial positions are at best just not reflected by our utility colleagues and friends. I would expect some robust debate from the IPP community about price formation, particularly fast start and scarcity pricing, how widely the business practices of transmission providers differ, and I'd highlight the Bonneville Power Administration particularly in this regard, as well as how the exit provisions outlined in the design principles document could affect the ability of IPPs to actually put steel in the ground. I'd also like to highlight one transmission component in the EDAM principles document about how the market recognizes transmission rights by third parties and allocates congestion rent. That set of proposals really needs some scrutiny and transparency. Third parties have to be confident that notwithstanding congestion rent, transmission providers don't have an overriding incentive to maximize their own generators' revenue, which will almost always be greater than the allocated congestion revenue. So I highlight those issues because those are the kinds of points that a non-utility, non-transmission provider would bring to the table. IPPs and marketers are eager to engage with this initiative constructively and to work together to create a better and more competitive regional grid.
Thanks, Spencer. That's really helpful. And Commissioner Rechtschaffen, do you have thoughts about process and where we go from here?
I wanted to take a step back first and just echo some of what Commissioner Tawney and Commissioner Williamson and others said about how positive and encouraging the statements we heard earlier today, especially from the CEOs, very remarkable and very encouraging. I think it's very important for us to continue collaborating closely with our neighbors throughout the West to meet all of our reliability, ratepayer protection, and clean energy goals. And I think this is a very important step, and I'm very grateful to the very hardworking members of the working group who came up with these principles, which is a very good basis to start from. I understand why the process evolved as it did over the summer, but I agree with Chair Williamson and Spencer that going forward we need to shift and we need to have a more open and inclusive process. I think we maybe can adopt some of the successful lessons we learned from the GRC process without inflicting that on that exact process on everybody. But I appreciate what Chair Williamson said about not being overwhelmed. But we do have an opportunity here. We do have momentum, and there's a lot happening, and it's very important to move forward. So with apologies to those people who aren't sports fans, but the legendary UCLA coach John Wooden had a phrase. He told his players to be quick, but hurry. So we need to move quickly, but not in a hurry, while given the opportunity for all folks to weigh in. I do just on the substantive elements that were mentioned. I think there are. I'm in accord with some of the comments from others about the importance of resource efficiency and GHG accounting. There is an element that's important, I think, to California entities in particular, whose members are not voluntary participants in EIM or won't be in EDAM, and that's the idea in the principles. This expectation that participation will come with a set of meaningful commitments and obligations, and the outline discusses some of what those might be, including a minimum period of participation and other requirements. But I think that's an important principle that's included in there.
Great, thanks, Commissioner Ruckshoff. And so we've heard a theme of transparency and openness, and you need to involve all stakeholders. Just a follow-up question: if this is to transition into a standard CAISO stakeholder process, does that help meet the requirements of the transparency and inclusivity? Or are there other kind of suggestions you might make for them? And this is for anybody on the panel that might want to add some additional thoughts.
I'll take a stab at it. Go ahead, Lisa.
Okay. I think the CAISO stakeholder process has a lot going for it, right? It's notwithstanding the resources challenge of keeping up with it that Chair Williamson pointed to, its openness, the way you can track how parties are commenting and how the CAISO is responding to those comments from straw proposal to straw proposal, I think is very productive. And I look forward to really seeing how those comments lay out, and then seeing how those stakeholder forums where folks can really articulate the views like what Spencer raised come forward. I think that openness is really powerful, and does there need to be more on top of that? Probably, but each of us have our own sort of groups that we work with to try to unpack these things as well, and the CAISO's always made itself available to answer questions and so on. I think that's also really productive. I suspect this is going to come up in all sorts of forums, including at the CRPC-YRAB meeting next week. I suspect we'll all be talking about it for the next 12 months in a wide variety of forums.
Great. Thanks, Commissioner Tani. Tony, did you want to add some additional thoughts?
Yeah. So I do think the ISO stakeholder process is a good jumping off point. It has that centralized and open components to it that allow everyone to assess everyone's positions. It can, at times, end up being sort of a talk at forum where everyone's just talking at each other, especially in this virtual environment where you're not forced to, be getting coffee with the people in the back of the room at the same time. And so I think we all need to take a commitment to try to use that process as a vehicle for resolving issues, not just taking positions. And I think that'll be a primary challenge moving forward. And we don't have a lot of time. There's a tremendous number of complex issues that I think have to be worked out in a reasonably short period of time.
Great. Thanks, Tony. So to pick up on the theme that Commissioner Williamson mentioned and actually Commissioner Rechtschaffen about kind of going fast but not hurrying, there are a lot of conversations and initiatives within the Western Interconnection right now on enhanced market collaboration. So I think we could recognize EDAM alone could have a fair amount of workload, but there are other conversations as well. How do you look at this EDAM effort in the context of those other discussions? And we'll start with you, Commissioner Williamson, on that question.
Yeah, thank you. It's such an important one because, again, we're so happy to be at the table. It's such an exciting time to be in this field. And as we heard earlier, Nevada, we do have a 2030 legislative requirement now of joining an RTO. And so we are certainly in the quickly but not hurrying phase. So just collaborating with our neighbors is so important as we work through these different exciting proposals. And to me, from where I sit, I think it's important to view EDAM as not mutually exclusive of any of those other proposals, that the conversation around EDAM can continue with talking about the Northwest Power Pools initiative or any of the other initiatives out there. So to view these not as mutually exclusive, but as building blocks, as continued conversations, as different tables that we all need to sit at to come to together, but that one path does not sort of mutually exclude any of the others, if that makes sense.
Yes, it does. And Tony, do you have some thoughts on this?
Yeah, so I don't view the paths as mutually exclusive, and I clearly think that looking at the RAP and its elements, and I think that really also provides a really helpful and complementary development in the industry, where you're not just looking at sort of a cloud of procurement policies on one side and then the California RA policies with all their warts on the other. You are looking at something there to build off of. So I actually don't see these developments as mutually exclusive, and they're just reality, right? To expect utilities in the West that have to make market choices one way or the other to not do their due diligence, that's not a reasonable expectation. Everyone needs to look at their options, and so I don't see them as mutually exclusive, but I do see EDAM as the low-hanging fruit. There's so much work that has been put into EDAM, both from a systems and a collaboration and a market design standpoint, that it just seems that would be not productive to just abandon it because there's a myriad of other options. We have to walk and chew gum on this at the same time, maybe a couple different flavors of gum. And that's just the world we live in, and we've got to deal with it. I would add real quickly, an RTO market is no panacea. I mean, for those that are in one, if you want to talk about funding of financial transmission rights by load and other things that are quite controversial, call me offline and we can talk about it. I think people underestimate the obstacles, and even within an RTO structure, the ongoing struggles of operating within that paradigm. And so EDM is what's in front of us, as well as the other market options that are out there, and we just need to tackle them all at the same time.
Thanks, Tony. Spencer, you've talked about your membership that looks different, right, than the traditional utilities. How's your membership, and how are you thinking about this in the context of the other initiatives?
Thanks, Therese. As I started saying a few minutes ago, EDAM is really a worthwhile initiative, and I applaud the utilities for stepping up here and re-engaging. From our perspective, it can't be the end goal of further regionalization, and it can't drag out forever. It may be as far as we can go without actually forming an RTO that consolidates balancing authorities and reforms transmission planning. And so my hope is that the ISO injects a sense of urgency into the stakeholder timeline. You've raised this issue of incrementalism, Therese, which I think is injected into most of these regional conversations. And I don't dispute that a staged approach to developing regional markets can help us move forward rather than just stalling out. But I do want to emphasize that we have both statutory and market pressures across the West that hang over this initiative. Washington and now Oregon, alongside New Mexico, have passed 100% clean energy mandates alongside California. Commissioner Williamson already mentioned the RTO bill in Nevada. We also have large, sophisticated power consumers across the West who are committed to going carbon free. And many of them are convinced, based on actual experience procuring actual clean power in RTOs, that the model that an RTO offers of not having contract-based transmission anymore, not having pancaked rates, not having balkanized borrowing authorities, that's a better alternative. And those market pressures on the part of consumers and the legal pressures to decarbonize in an effective way are not going away. So I do worry a little bit about the intellectual opportunity cost of all the smart people involved in this forum and who are listening, pouring themselves into an initiative that takes another incremental step and holds at bay harder conversations about governance and BA consolidation and transmission. But I really mean that as a cautionary note more than anything. It's great to see the broader West lining up behind the Western RA program, which it must be said is a compliance program. It's not a market. It does have many of the key features of an RTO, and I've been impressed how robust the governance conversation in the RA context has been. I think it's a good model for us for other initiatives going forward. I also think it's really positive to have Southwest Power Pool starting to pitch regional market solutions that from the beginning can simply sidestep the brick wall of single state governance that has bedeviled RTO conversations that have revolved around the ISO. So I think collectively we should take both the EDAM initiative seriously, take SBP's work seriously, and try to pick a best course. And we may pick different courses, which is okay. That's been the experience along many seams in the East between the RTOs. The final point I guess I would make is I hope that state commissions evaluate their regulated entities' decision-making about the best path forward here with a pretty clear view of the money that in our view is being left on the table every day, both for power and transmission customers, the longer we wait to actually fully regionalize the Western grid.
Thanks, Spencer. So before we are going to transition, talk a little bit about governance, but before we do, anybody else on the panel want to offer any thoughts about kind of EDAM in the context of the other conversations in the West? I saw it. No. Okay. Just gave you an option.
I would, Teresa.
Go ahead.
I think Chair Williamson, Tony, and Spencer really made very important points. I want to hearken back to what Elliot Mainzer said really at the start of the program today. There's been a convergence of interest in these issues like there has never been before. And I think that's a very, very good thing. People are really focused on regional markets, the need for robust rules for resource adequacy and shared reliability efforts. How do we achieve clean energy mandates across the West now that more and more states have gone that way? So it's an opportune time to be doing things like EDAM, and it's one model. There are other models. It solves one piece of the puzzle. And as Spencer noted, we have legislative and market mandates that are driving us. But this is the time now. It's been hard to generate interest in some quarters over the past 10 years, or harder than some places and elsewhere. Now everyone's focused on it. And I think Tony is right that it is, if it's not low-hanging fruit, it's lower-hanging fruit. And it's the next logical step that we should capitalize on.
Great. Thanks, Commissioner Rechtschaffen. So let's transition to governance. We've heard it on several of the panels earlier today, and we've heard it mentioned, right, the ISO board and EIM governing body has approved joint authority rules for EIM participants, for rules that apply to EIM participants. So what are your thoughts? What substance and process considerations would you recommend for EDAM governance? And we'll start with Commissioner Tani.
So, when I look through the principles, I start by looking for places where they really clearly intersect with our decision making as state regulators. And while I think we'll have really keen interest in the issues around cost allocation and so on, our fundamental decision making isn't as implicated as it might be if we were taking on a full RTO sort of conversation. I think it really brings me to focus in on the critical questions around how the market rules are shaped and how that then trickles into cost or savings for customers that we are regulating for. And, having sort of done that thought exercise, I land feeling pretty comfortable with what we've seen so far, at least, that the joint authority model is going to be a constructive and an adaptive answer to this expansion. The Governance Review Committee had begun to unpack, as you well know, Therese, had begun to really unpack what would be implicated by EDAM, and then with the pause, I think just didn't have enough substance to work with. These principles, I think, put enough substance on the table to pick that conversation up again about the scope of board decisions that are implicated, and to really start to think about how could joint authority, what are the implications for joint authority? And we have yet to see how joint authority is going to work in practice. But, as I observe the two governing bodies, the two boards working together more and more over 2021, I think it will really highlight the ways in which we have more shared interests than we have competing interests between all the different entities across the West. And when we have competing interests, it will be challenging. It will continue to be challenging. But more and more, I think we continue to see how interdependent we really are, and that we can't pretend somehow that we can take our ball and go home because we don't like some element. Even if we end up with seams, we're going to be deeply impacted by each other. And I would rather be at the table, as hard as it is to resource that conversation, than not. And in that vein, I think from a process perspective, and we heard this over and over again this morning, I really want to highlight the urgency, both the cost savings that Spencer pointed to, that the state-led market study pointed to. Continued regionalization brings cost savings potentially home to customers that are energy burdened. And for Oregon customers, at least, having California in that footprint really matters. And I am anxious to see that cost savings in no small part because we keep getting hit in the face by climate impacts that are costing those same customers. And you heard Patty Poppe talk about that for Northern California. It is not been as catastrophic in Oregon, but we are seeing already increased costs and decreased reliability and real implications for adapting to climate. And we both need to decarbonize to address that and run a clean and reliable system, but we also are now having to put significant dollars into adapting to that climate change. And anywhere we can be bringing home cost savings rather than additional costs, I'm anxious to find those, because we do have significantly energy burdened consumers, and this isn't going to, adapting to climate change isn't going to get cheaper. So I'm anxious to see this move forward for all of those reasons, but in no small part because of the value proposition I see for customers.
Great. Thanks, Commissioner Tani. Commissioner Rechtschaffen, your thoughts on governance and process associated with that?
I'm going to choose to be optimistic, which is not necessarily what you'd expect when you're talking about something as thorny and challenging as governance. I will say everyone knows how critically important it is for EDAM and any type of market collaboration. And we've struggled over the years with it, but I think as we go forward, we need to make sure that these issues are thoughtfully addressed in a way that's fair to all participating entities. And that's obviously going to be critical, not just for EDAM, but for any move to full market integration. I'm going to build on what Kevin Payne of Edison said. He articulated this morning that the joint authority rules that were developed for the EIM are a strong foundation to build on. I really think that's true. They resulted from a multi-year process with many stakeholders to develop consensus on the rules for the EIM market. I think we made real progress. I think, and Commissioner Tani mentioned this in passing, that she's seen a little bit of this already. I think the rules will provide for a more collaborative process and more involvement of the EIM governing body and the decisions of CAISO. And I think we should see how these rules work before trying to change them in any significant way. I don't see the evolution toward EDAM as necessitating any changes in these rules. Of course, we're always interested in potential ideas that can benefit all stakeholders while providing the requisite certainty that participants need. But I think we've come to a point where we have a meaningful evolution towards shared authority, which we need to do. We need to take some of those bricks out of that brick wall that Spencer talked about. And I think we have a very good start, and I'm optimistic about going forward.
Thank you. Rebecca Wagner, you have some thoughts on governance, having done it twice now?
I know, and we're still talking about it, and we will continue to talk about it. It's an important topic. I think first and foremost, any entity participating in a market wants to make sure that their positions are known, whether you're a utility, an independent power producer, a regulator, which I always find very important. But it's doable. I share Commissioner Rechtschaffen's optimism, both in the near term and the long term. Yes, I've done this a couple of stints on this, and I have to say the evolution that we made in the Governance Review Committee this time around is meaningful, and it forms a solid foundation, like we heard from Kevin Payne, that I think that there might be some fine-tuning that's necessary as we further evaluate the market design. But what was laid out for us today in terms of the sticky issue of market design, combined with the time and effort that was put forth turning governance upside down, inside out, I think we start there. I think it's an easy starting point. And I mean, I would throw out that the Governance Review Committee originally intended to tackle EDAM obviously we had the pause. But we're still convened. We're down a few players, but we still have a solid team and an amazing leader. I think let's build on that momentum. Let's finish this out. And that's certainly up to the ISO board and the governing body. But I think let's carry this out. Let's get through this, and start from what we've already constructed, which I think is top notch, but obviously I'm biased. Looking to the broader governance discussion, yes, it's always going to be looming out there, but it's a different animal than the expertise than we've observed today. It's not as technical, but it's politically technical and surgical and challenging, and needs stakeholders who really want to see the effort to reform, or as I like to say, liberate the ISO, to be a fully functioning market solution for all of the West, that for states that have carbon policies and clean energy commitments. We need something, and I think right now the limitation of governance is a hindrance to achieving that ideal state, even though there's no such thing as an ideal state until it changes. But I think we're rowing in the right direction. I think there's momentum among the Western states and the utilities with their commitments to clean energy. So I'm optimistic for the future, but I would short circuit the discussion on the near-term EDAM debate on governance to start with what we have, make some fine refinements if necessary as market design evolves. But there is urgency, and to Commissioner Tawny's point, it's about bringing cost savings to customers. It's the climate crisis that we're facing. Nevada has been very smoky, courtesy of the fires, as well as even though Las Vegas is perceived as a hot city, it's continually getting hotter, as is Northern Nevada and Reno, where I live. So there is urgency. We have a climate crisis. We need to bring value to customers. We can't keep debating things that some of which we don't have control. So we should take control of what we can and move forward, and not let governance or the perception of what independence and fair governance is hold us back. So I'll get off my soapbox. Sorry, Therese. Thank you.
Oh, thanks for the comments. Thanks to all of you. I'll give the other panelists a chance if you want to speak at all to governance or anything about governance process. You have any additional thoughts you want to add, or reactions or responses?
And real quick, Therese, I do think what Rebecca's outlined is a reasonable and expeditious way forward, because we don't have years to tackle these things. Some of the issues that other panelists have raised, Jim Baggs talking about the impact that EDM would have on the entirety of the West and how people do business, and some of the firmness of transfers. These are the kind of technical issues, that Bobby Olson had raised from SRP. These are the kind of technical issues I think we need to take into account when we're looking at what types of refinements to the joint authority model we should be considering.
Great. Thanks, Tony. Okay, I'm going to give any last word to any of the panelists before we pass this back, if anybody has anything else to say. Okay, I'm going to do a couple of things. First of all, thank you to CAISO for actually envisioning this panel, right? Giving us an opportunity to have a neutral moderator and a very diverse set of panelists. I appreciate this. I think there have been some really terrific thoughts and comments that you've provided that are just almost really the first step of the broadening of the stakeholder process and launching these conversations. So thank you for your participation and your thoughts, and we'll turn it back to you, Joanne.
Great. Thank you, Therese, and to all the panelists. We appreciate your participation in this panel and look forward to more developments in governance as obviously the details unfold. It was really great to hear the collaborative and optimistic tone in the conversation. And to Commissioner Williamson's point, we recognize that everyone is resource constrained. So we will do everything we can to help you engage efficiently and effectively in this initiative and really make it as easy as possible for all of you, which we're going to highlight in this last panel. So thank you, Therese, and to all the panelists. I also appreciate the comments from Tony and Commissioner Tawney that it's going to take all of us working tightly together. And so I think our goal moving forward on our process is to the popular term, make haste, not waste, seems very appropriate. All right, so we're going to now move to talk a little bit more detail about the stakeholder process that we've been talking about now. I'm going to be joined by several of my colleagues. Anna McKenna, she's Vice President of Market Policy and Performance. Khaled Abdulrahman, Vice President of Technology. And Stacy Crowley, Vice President of External Affairs. So it's nice to be joined by the three of you. Thanks for joining. And each of them are going to briefly discuss how we plan to formally address the key elements of the market design, the approach and timing for implementation, and next steps on governance review. But first, I want to just reinforce a few facts that we heard from the prior panel. I think it's important that inclusive stakeholder input is an important element in developing and implementing sound market design and governance, which we repeatedly heard. So I think it's important for the need for transparency and inclusivity, as we've mentioned. So we look forward to working with stakeholders across the region to leverage our very open stakeholder process for the EDAM initiative. I think many of you are familiar with our standard 4 proposal iterations of the issue paper, straw proposal, draft final proposal, and ultimately the final proposal, and which we will go through that standard process. But we'll also leverage a new feature that we recently added to our standard stakeholder process, which is workshops. So as a new step early on in the stakeholder process, it has the intent to gather stakeholder input to better inform the development of the initial straw proposal. And that's something that we heard from stakeholders over the past year. So we're going to take this concept to the next level for the EDAM initiative by leveraging the work that's already been done on the EDAM principles, by forming topical working groups that Anna will talk about in just a minute. The other important element that's going to make this successful is your commitment and partnership throughout the process. We will be on an aggressive timeline to meet the long-term goal of having a product ready by 2024. Therefore, it will be important, to adhere to a cadence of delivery and proposal review cycles that get us to that goal. So we'll work with stakeholders to ensure we provide the review and comment timelines along the way, and make sure we're communicating effectively to reach our broader stakeholder audience. So we didn't have a lot of time to get into the details of the principles today, so I'm going to ask Anna to kick us off with how will our stakeholder audience get more information about these common design EDAM principles that we've been talking about.
Yes, thank you, Joanne. Thank you, Joanne. I'll be happy to get into that a little bit more. And good morning, everyone. Today's discussion was excellent and really highlights the need for us to resume our efforts on designing EDAM through an open, inclusive, collaborative stakeholder process. But as Joanne noted, this forum did not lend itself well for a deeper dive on the EDAM core market principles. That said, we'll make sure to provide adequate time to discuss these principles further in the robust stakeholder process we're about to commence. After today, we will launch an intensive market design effort through which over the next 14 months, and in close collaboration with our stakeholders, we will be developing the details of the components of the EDAM market design. We will start with a foundational meeting, which we'll hold on November 12th. First, at that meeting, we will spend some time to discuss the EDAM core principles, and we'll invite the panelists to come back and participate in that discussion. Through that, we hope to provide stakeholders an opportunity to ask more questions and for the panelists to provide any necessary clarifications. And we will seek further input as we integrate these principles in the EDAM market design. Also on the 12th, we'll take some time to provide an overview of the day-ahead market and describe how EDAM will work to extend the benefits of a centralized optimization of the day-ahead timeframe to minimize costs and optimize transmission use across the greater Western footprint. Finally, on the 12th, we'll discuss, as Joanne noted, the formulation of 3 working groups that will be assigned specific action items to develop specific components of EDAM and will be conducted separately but contemporaneously. You know, as we extend the EDAM to other parts of the West, we thought it was really critical and important at this time that we further enhance the stakeholder process to allow for more active participation in the design of the EDAM itself. And we want to solicit critical input that we will organize, synthesize, and incorporate into the overall design. Also, breaking up into separate working groups that work on the separate issues contemporaneously will allow us to maintain a steady and active cadence to the development of a comprehensive proposal. The working groups will initially focus on key foundational components of EDAM. One group will focus on supply commitment and resource efficiency. Another will focus on transmission commitment and congestion revenue allocation. And a third will focus on greenhouse accounting and costs. The groups will be open to all stakeholders. The meetings will be public, and they will be facilitated by select leaders to ensure open, collaborative discussions and constructive resolution of market design issues to drive towards actual proposals. We anticipate the groups will go from November through the end of January and expect to have for the groups to put forth proposals that we hope to incorporate into a comprehensive straw proposal at the end of February. Also, we expect that these working groups will be active throughout the stakeholder process so that we can leverage the groups to further vet and shape final design as we work towards completion. Now, we recognize that there are also peripheral items that will not be addressed in the working groups. Therefore, whilst the groups are working on specific components of the EDAM design, the ISO will develop proposals for the peripheral elements so that we can provide a comprehensive straw proposal at the end of February. Through the remainder of 2022, we will work with stakeholders to further develop and integrate the various components of the EDAM and will drive towards our goal to brief the Board of Governors and governing body by the end of 2022. And as we get deeper into the details in the design effort, we will evaluate whether we need further resources to ensure we maintain the momentum we seek towards completing the market design by the end of 2022. Finally, as noted on the slide before you, at the same time that we will be developing the EDAM design, we also will be continuing our efforts to complete the design of key market elements, which include the day-ahead market enhancements, wheel-through priorities, and price formation. With that, I will turn it over to Khaled now, who will share with you the key EDAM implementation activities. And thank you.
Thank you, Anna, and good morning, everyone. This is Khaled Abdurrahman, Vice President of Power System Technology at California ISO, and I'm going to cover at a high level the technical implementation plan of the extended day-ahead market. To start, I just want to emphasize that the technology team, including myself and many of my senior staff, are directly involved and integrated with a unified ISO team during the policy development phase that Anna was describing earlier. This integration is for the sake of providing timely information related to the technical implementation feasibility and synthesizing the market design elements via mathematical formulation for an efficient market optimization outcome. This collaboration during the policy phase will allow for a clear project scope definition that will be used, and it's important and it will help us expedite any aspects of the project implementation plan. So the technology engagement starts during early stages of policy development, and what you see on the slide is the start of the formal project implementation right after the policy is approved. The ISO system changes and testing will take place and continue to evolve throughout the 2023 year, as seen on the slide. This work will actually leverage and build on top of the already and the technology that we have built for the EIM. So we are not starting actually from scratch. We're going to be leveraging a lot of knowledge base that we collected during the EIM implementation. Along with the ISO system changes, there is a parallel engagement track. A parallel engagement track that you see on the slide will be ramping up with the balancing area entities that are interested in joining the EDAM to ensure that enough technical information is available to allow market participants, systems, and data interfaces to be implemented, tested, and ready for the EDAM go live. I'm going to conclude by saying that I'm very excited and empowered by what I have heard today from the different panelists and working group. And this shows actually what the power of collaboration can do. And I'm looking forward for this opportunity for us. And with this, I would like to hand it over to our Vice President of External Affairs, Stacy Crowley, to shed some light on the governance reform plan.
Thank you, Khaled. Thanks for the conversation about the importance of the next steps and some of the urgency that was expressed earlier today. I'm so glad to see so many folks engaged and interested in this next important step. And in my mind, I see all of the faces from the wonderful people that have engaged in these discussions over the years. And that diversity of the people and all of their unique perspectives is what brings us here today. And it's in that context that we understand that the critical importance of the fair and balanced governance structure that can accompany the evolution of our markets as we look to extending the day-ahead market. The governance over EIM matters has evolved, as was discussed earlier, to reflect the growing participation in the West and the value that EIM brings to all participants, both in terms of the quantitative benefits and qualitative benefits that come from that sharing and transfer of energy. The exploration of the modifications to the current governance structure to adapt to the day-ahead market for the West requires additional discussion with all stakeholders. As we mentioned, the Governance Review Committee, which was established back in 2019 by the board and the governing body to review EIM governance, proposed, and both the governing body and the board approved, the joint authority model over EIM applicable rules. And I think, as others have noted, this is a significant evolution that has bearing on and should be considered for or as a foundation to the discussion on the EDAM market. And through that process, the GRC, and we are so appreciative of the hard and thoughtful work that they did over those 2 years, was able to develop consensus and over a broad range of issues through this open and iterative process. You heard some initial thinking on the governance process on the previous panel, and it is our expectation that the Board of Governors and the EM governing body will work with the Governance Review Committee to consider the process for and the substance of the governance changes or implications for a extended day-ahead market. We will work with these bodies in the coming weeks to get input on the timing that will involve stakeholders in a public process. We envision the timing of governance review to recognize in part the more detailed market design coming out of the policy initiative. As you will see from the block on EDAM governance reforms on the slide in front of you, based on the preliminary work that that the GRC has done on this topic, we may not need to take the same amount of time to come to a decision point on governance, but that is still to be determined, and we'll look forward to providing more information as we have conversations with the governing body and the Board of Governors in the near future. So with that, I will turn it back to Joanne.
Great. Thank you, Stacy. And thank you, Anna and Khaled, for walking us through the next steps. That essentially outlines our high-level planned approach and what we are striving to achieve with the launch of the EDAM initiative. And so we look forward to engaging with all of you on all of these aspects of the EDAM initiative. And so now, before I hand the mic back to Elliot for some closing remarks, I did want to wrap up with a couple of items. I first wanted to thank all of you for joining us today virtually. And on November 12th, we look forward to hosting the workshop. Details on how to join that workshop will be communicated via the ISO's daily briefing. The stakeholder calendar will indicate details, and on the EDAM initiative webpage. So mark your calendars now for November 12th to join us. Also, you can contact Christina Osborne or Milos Bosanak. He is going to be the ISO sector lead for the EDAM initiative. So the slide in front of you provides their contact information. And so now I would like to turn it back over to Elliot Mainzer for our closing remarks. Thanks, Elliot.
Well, thank you, Joanne. It's just been just a fabulous morning. I've so much appreciated everybody being here with us today. Just tremendous attendance, a real diversity from across the West, and really appreciate the discussions. Just deeply grateful for all of our panelists for their contributions and their partnership. And I wanted to also really echo that theme of inclusivity. We know that's going to just be extremely important here in the months ahead as we get down to the hard work, the design, and I'm really looking forward to that effort. So these really, as we said from the beginning, these are such pivotal times for the West. I'm really looking forward to the next steps, making real progress together in the months ahead. And we're going to look forward to our next meeting on November 12th. And we'll try to make some real additional progress, looking forward to that real engagement. And until then, thanks again to everybody, and please stay safe and healthy. We'll talk to you soon. Thank you very much.